Yes, welcome everybody to the Kinship Care Week conference on the importance of positive relationships in kinship care. My name is Robin Duncan. I'm the director at AFA Scotland, which is one of the organisations that hosts the Kinship Care Advice Service for Scotland, and alongside Adoption UK and in collaboration with the Child Poverty Action Group. So my role today is to introduce the event and in due course to introduce the various speakers, and then the last chunk of the event will be a question and answer session. So to put questions that have come from you and participants to the panel that we'll have at the end of the day. There's a Q&A button on your screen. You should be able to find a Q&A button on your screen. So if you have any questions that occur to you at any point during the morning, please just write them in there and we'll pick them up in that end session. But certainly don't feel you need to wait until the end to put them in there. If you've been to an event earlier in the week, welcome back to Kinship Care Week. If you haven't, welcome to Kinship Care Week, which is organised by KCAS. So, and a big thank you to all the folk in KCAS who've put the programme together. It's a really positive and full programme. So thank you to them. I'm just going to say a bit about the week, the themes that we're trying to promote during the week, and a little bit about KCAS itself. We've got a short video clip from the Minister for Children and Young People, Claire Hockey, to show that in a few minutes, and another very short video clip about the Kinship Care Service. So just in terms of the week itself, and what we're trying to achieve for the week, I guess the kind of at its heart, the purpose of Kinship Care Week is about celebrating kinship care. I think we spend an awful lot of time discussing the challenges and difficulties in kinship care. There's just something about taking a bit of time to stand back from that and recognise and celebrate and talk about the amazing contribution that kinship care is make to children's lives in Scotland, and just how over the last couple of years and through the pandemic, that's probably been more evident than it's ever been before. But so that's the kind of core of what Kinship Care Week's about, and it's about celebrating and promoting kinship care. But it's also an opportunity to talk about some of the kind of key issues that kinship carers talk about and that practitioners talk about as being at the kind of top priorities of the moment, and that we'd to identify a couple of things that we want to concentrate on in terms of that. And I guess in relation to when you're talking about kinship care in that way, there are plenty of reasons to be frustrated and plenty of challenge that people have grappled with, but there are also some really positive signs of development. So I guess the cup half empty view is that if you speak to kinship carers who've been around for a while or to practitioners, almost all of them will say, we've known about the problems that face kinship care at the moment for a really long time, and yet it's agonisingly slow trying to get any progress and resolve these problems. The cup half full view would be, and this probably links to the promise and the momentum that's come from the promise, is that there's a real determination across all sorts of different agencies and care groups and others to make a difference and to address these problems at the moment. And no doubt if it was easy, it would have been done, but I think we are at a point where there's an opportunity to actually achieve some important change in relation to the way that kinship carers are supported and the way that kinship care is given a more central place. So just in terms of the three themes then, the first theme is celebrating kinship care in Scotland, and the link to the promise there was that so many of the kinship carers who spoke to the Independent Care Review talked about the fact that they felt that their voice was often overlooked or not sufficiently valued, or in some cases just simply ignored, and that Kinship Care Week is one of the ways that we might redress that balance to some extent. It's where we can make as much noise as we can about the contribution that kinship carers make, and agree collectively that we need to get better at recognising that and valuing what they offer. Now, I mentioned that the Minister for Children and Young People wasn't able, Claire Hockey wasn't able to attend today. She did attend an event earlier in the week as part of Kinship Care Week and spoke with a group of kinship carers there for a really helpful discussion. And she also agreed to do a little introductory video to give her comments and thoughts in relation to the week. So Simon, technological gremlins permitting, would you be able to do what's necessary to show the video from the Minister on the screen?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely done, Robin. Let's hope that this works okay. Please let me know, everybody, if there are any hiccups.
She appeared briefly, Simon, but she then disappeared.
With kinship. I know that being a kinship carer is rewarding, but also has its challenges. And I recognise it has been particularly challenging for the past 2 years for kinship carers across Scotland. Whilst the pandemic have caused disruption to your support networks, it showed the resilience and commitment you have for the children in your care. That's why Kinship Carer Week is particularly valuable. It provides us with an opportunity to recognise and celebrate the important role you play in providing loving, secure, stable and nurturing homes for children and young people. In our programme for government, we committed to investing £500 million in a whole family wellbeing fund over the course of this Parliament to give families across Scotland access to the help they need at the right time. I want to assure you that we are working hard alongside local authorities, voluntary organisations and our partners to improve the support we provide you, children and professionals working with kinship families. We're fully committed to keeping the promise, and we will be saying more about how we intend to do that and what it means for you over the coming weeks. I would like to thank all kinship care groups who have arranged events in your local area and the Kinship Care Advisory Service for arranging a week full of events, ranging from promoting positive relationships in kinship care to a legal Q&A. All of the events are free and you can sign up via the KCAS website. Thank you to the KCAS Advisory Group members who have worked hard to put together their very informative What Now booklet, which will launch this week. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to meet with some members of the advisory group this week to hear about their care experiences. I would like to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to all kinship carers across Scotland. You make a big difference to the lives of children in your care. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Simon. That all worked perfectly, I think. Did at my end anyway. So, and I think it is really important to have that level of support from the Scottish Government and from the highest level and kind of recognition from the Minister and across government actually that the need to move forward with changing kinship care is really important, and I think that's one of the positive signs at the moment. And so I'm sure Scottish Government colleagues who are here today will pass on our thanks to the Minister for agreeing to do that and giving that very supportive message for the conference. I'm just going to say something then about the other two things so celebrating kinship care was the first. The second one is around support to kinship care and the need to improve the level of support for kinship carers. And it's another areas where we know there are some examples of really good support being provided, but also the challenges and difficulties about the lack of consistency in support in different parts of Scotland have been just very widely discussed and talked about for a period of time. And where it is working well, kinship support comes from lots of different sources. So it may well be from kinship care groups and peer support. It might be from statutory and voluntary organisations. And there is a particular role for the Kinship Care Advice Service in that. And one of the things that we want to be able to do with Kinship Care Week is to kind of promote what's available through the Kinship Care Advice Service so that carers across Scotland know that they know what they can access and how they can access that. It is being extremely well used by carers from across the country, but it's always that bit about how do you get the information out there, particularly to new carers who are coming into kinship care at the beginning. We're really delighted that Alana's joined us today, and Alana is one of the kinship carers on the KCAS advisory group, and she's going to be able to talk about some of the things that have been developed, and one of which is the What Now booklet that the Minister just referred to. So we'll come to that shortly. But Simon, the other video we were going to show was the very short video about what the Kinship Care Service offers. So again, if you're able to show that just now, that would be great. And well. Perfect. Thank you very much, Simon. That was obviously a lot of information in 40 seconds, but helpful. And I think if we were going to plug anything, it would be, so if you can make sure that you're aware of and your colleagues are aware of, and any carers that you know and work with and support are aware of the kinship.scot website and the helpline number. If you go to kinship.scot, there's information there about all of the issues that are mentioned on that very short clip, including the kind of events and training that are run throughout the year, similar to the events being run this week. And I suppose just more broadly that point that the Kinship Care Service is involved with kinship carers and kinship care groups across Scotland, but also with practitioners and various different agencies and policy groups like the Kinship Collaborative that are trying to make a difference, and to be part of those conversations that will actually move on some of these really intractable difficulties that have been around. And maybe just one point in relation to the helpline number, that 0808 800 0006. If there are issues that emerge for you personally from any of this things that are discussed today in any of these issues that are raised, please do make use of that helpline. If there's further information you want, or there are kind of issues in terms of some of the matters discussed, or that trigger feelings for you that you want to talk to somebody else about, either remember that number 0808 800 0006, or you can get it on the kinship.scot website, and please do make use of that. So finally, the third theme for the week that we'd identified was about supporting relationships, and again there's a link back to the promise here, where it was really clear from the evidence given to the promise particularly by care experienced children and young people, that they hadn't been able to maintain the relationships with some of the people who were most important to them. And that might have been because the system was over complex or was too process driven, or it might have been because there wasn't always the people involved weren't always sufficiently tuned in to the impact on the children of the experiences they'd had, and sometimes adverse and traumatic experiences they'd had, and the supports that they and the people who look after them would therefore need to help them heal and move forward in their lives. So that is the kind of central theme of today's conference, and that's why we're particularly delighted that Sally and Richard are able to join us, and we'll come back to what they're going to contribute a little bit later on in the morning. So before bringing Alana into the conversation, just a few practical bits. We're aiming to finish at 1 o'clock. We'll have a break for 15 minutes or so at about 11:30 if all goes to plan. The Q&A session is the last session of the morning, as well as Sally and Richard and Alana will be joined for that by Louisa Brown from the Scottish Government. Louisa is the team leader in the family care team. So if you have any questions for any of the participants or just general questions, please do remember to stick them in the Q&A function, and we'll come to that at the end. If there's any technical stuff that you're struggling with, you can contact Simon, who beavers away in the background and sort things out. So, Alana, maybe I could introduce you, and if you could do whatever you need to do to press a button to make yourself appear on the screen, that would be grand. You're getting there.
There we go. Yeah, so the host needed to do it.
All right,
No problem.
Yeah. We're under Simon's control all day today, and it will do what. So, Alana, thank you so much for joining us today. I think in a lot of these events, people will say it's just so valuable when people are prepared, willing and able to share their own personal experiences, rather than it just be people who are talking about it from the outside, if you like. So thank you very, very much for agreeing to come along and say something about your experience as a kinship carer, and also as part of some of the kind of development groups. And what we thought would be easy is if we just have essentially a conversation about your involvement, and hopefully through that you get the opportunity to talk about issues. So I know it's important for you that we maintain confidentiality, so you wouldn't want to use your children's names and all the rest of it. But could you just say a little bit about your own circumstances and your own journey in relation to becoming a kinship carer, and where you are with all of that, and then we'll maybe come on to some of the other stuff that you do through the kinship service and that.
Yes, certainly. Thank you for the introduction, Robin, and thank you for having me on this conference as well. It's a pleasure to be able to, I suppose, put the voice of a kinship carer, the real lived experience. Although we all have a different experience per se, we all have that children at the end of the day that are obviously fundamentally the most important. So as Robin rightly says, my name's Alana. Basically myself and my partner are parents to 3 children. I'll get onto that a little bit, how we've kind of come to that journey. Our experience in kinship care has been over a 4-year period, where we took care of my niece initially, and my nephew more latterly from their birth, so straight out of hospital, to successfully adopting them both within this time period as well. We also have a 2-year-old who was born in between both of the children's care experiences as well. So yes, you've heard it right, we have 3 children of 4 years and under, so yes. I've been involved with the KCAS, I suppose the KCAS overall for about 18 months, which started with the Kinship Advisory Group, which basically is a group of kinship carers across the whole of Scotland. So it's not, I suppose it's quite a wide demographic. It's not particular age group or particular geographical areas. There's quite a range of different kinship carers and different experiences, and there's quite a lot of us as well. So I think strength in numbers gives us a good standing to provide, and I suppose that real lived-in experience to help influence. Well, I think the KCAS steering group is one of the other things I'm involved with, which is helping with the Kinship Care Advice Service for Scotland, and how we can help the day-to-day element of the running of that, as well as the Kinship Collaborative, which Robin rightfully noted was more higher level kind of Scottish Government involvement to help in, I suppose, provide the support towards procedures, policies, things like that, and how we can make them better, and not just better for kinship carers, but also for the kinship children. So basically, it's allowing, I suppose, our point of view as kinship carers, basically to be taken in the key decision making and influencing policy and procedures, as I've noted. And so far the experience has been really promising. There's been a lot of things happening, and I think kinship carers as well as the practitioners out there can see that there's been a lot of talk, there's been a lot of events being held, including things like family day trips and things like that, which is, it's been fantastic, and it's been a long time coming, and it's really exciting, and hopeful to see what else is going to come out in the future there.
Thanks, Lana. So is that theme about carers feeling they were always being heard? I mean, does it feel okay being part of these groups, and that the voice is genuinely being heard from the kinship care perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I think prior to that 18 months ago, I'd hit a point, I suppose a brick wall, where I just really wasn't being heard at all. And I found it really difficult to navigate where to go to get the support that I needed. And it kind of, there's a Facebook group that is run by a lady called Jean Paxton, which I wish I'd come across way earlier in the day, and I think that kind of really highlighted the support groups and the support needed. You know, to have found it that late on in the day was quite disheartening, and I think it kind of got to me, and I was like, I really need to see what I could do to make that different for everyone else, because I'm not the only person that has hit that brick wall and thought, where am I going with this? You know, where can I go to get the support to talk about this, or to find the information? So yeah, definitely. It's,
and I wonder, people talk about this, the impact of becoming a kinship carer, because it's often such a sudden event in people's lives. I just want, could you say a wee bit about how that was for you? That and you've done it twice, sort of kind of the first time and then the second time, and whether there's a kind of comparison or contrast between the two.
There was, unfortunately, there was a huge difference between the two scenarios. First time round, you know, the first child you're ever taking on, 2 weeks to prepare for this child, so it was very daunting, and that actually there was only a month before we were actually told that we were going to be taking this child into our care. So everything was quite fast paced. You didn't really kind of have a moment to catch your breath. So I think a lot of the feelings, the anxieties, yeah, I suppose the anxiety, just been scared about the whole scenario, kind of is just pushed to aside, because your forefront decisions is just basically making everything as perfect as possible to make sure that this child gets the best start to their life, and also being able to, I suppose, shield them from what's about to come through the whole process. And I'll go on to speak about a little bit later on about how our journey went with that, but it was a much longer parenting assessment the first time round. So there was a lot of things we had to learn, and it was very unclear where we needed to go for support. Thankfully, we had a brilliant maternity social worker who kind of filled in the gaps that should have been covered by the kinship team. But I suppose numbers at that point were depleted in regards to the support that there was. Whereas the second time round, we'd been through that roller coaster already. We knew exactly what to expect. And yeah, it was just as daunting, if not actually, as I've said, and I've quite happily shared before to many people I've spoken to, is it was the hardest decision of my life. Because obviously we had my niece, I'd given birth to my son, who was basically 6 months at that point. So I was 6 months postpartum, where I had to make the most difficult decision in my life. Do we take on a third child, which would be the full sibling? And I found it was probably the most mentally hard decision I've ever had in my life. And I kind of really found that there wasn't exactly that support there, especially around mental health, or even just, I suppose, somebody to talk to about what that means, and really put it at ease. So yeah, it was both both decisions were really hard, and I can accept also many people out there will or have been in that same position.
Yeah, no, thanks, Lana. I mean, just the sheer practicalities of looking after 3 children in that age, quite apart from all the other things you're having to think about and work through. One of the themes, well, the main theme for today's conference is about positive relationships, and within that, the kind of links and contact that children have with other members of their families, with their parents or any other brothers and sisters. So we're just thinking in your situation, can you talk about whether they had contact with parents and siblings, and if so, how you were supported in relation to that, if you were supported in relation to
that? Yeah, so basically, that's because we've got the first time round, as I know, it was a 7-month parenting assessment, which for most people out there, that's a lot longer than what is normally expected. So we had that wave to ride through as it was, and that involvement was a third party, I don't know if it's a company organisation that were involved with the local authority to support the birth parents' contact, and there was, unfortunately, there was things that were missed, and things that were, I suppose, brushed to the side, particularly around medication. We had a particular situation where we wrote down exactly the medication that was required, as well as it being back on the back of the packaging. And unfortunately, the birth parents had given the medication twice within a 2-hour period with the baby's bottle. And then essentially it was allowed by that particular person that we hadn't communicated that when it was on paper. So things like this was fed back, and eventually it came to crunch time, is the best I could put it, where the social worker and third party sat down together, and we are talking about 2 weeks before rehabilitation was ruled out to the birth parents. So we'd been through quite, I suppose, a couple of situations that could have resulted in the child going back home to the birth parents. But as I noted, it took them to sit down and really kind of hash things out and marry up the lines, and obviously it was ruled out. And from then on, our kinship assessment started thereafter, which should have ran concurrently, which, as explained, due to staff numbers, it was obviously, unfortunately, we were a little bit let down on that part. When the rehabilitation was ruled out, the contact was then moved into the contact centre, which kind of actually started providing the contact that we should have seen, which where I mean by that is they have stricter kind of guidelines that obviously they have to be a little bit earlier, obviously confirm that they are also attending, as well as that we also got feedback from the back of the contact to say, like, obviously what we're going to expect, how the child's going to be when they get home, or if anything had happened. So that was particularly great. But because the contact centre was a half-hour bus ride away, the contact started to obviously reduce quite rapidly, and essentially from there, once everything was, I suppose, settled by social work, and we had the plans going forward, we moved to a kind of more neutral, public, child-friendly place, which was then supported by ourselves, myself and my partner, which started off great because I think there was the expectation, that there wasn't that social work involvement kind of shadowing over the birth parents, and this was they felt a little bit more at ease because it was family. Obviously, we chose a public place because their home is basically their safe place. We wanted to keep it as that for them. But obviously the attendance again started to fall. I suppose the priority of the child started to wean away. and emotions started to get quite heightened. Also being kind of 8 months pregnant at the time, ended up in kind of like a family disagreement in a public place, which wasn't what I needed to deal with at that point. It wasn't fair on the children to have to deal with that either. So again, things started to go down from there. Following the adoption element of that first time round for my niece, it took 2 years for us to actually get the adoption finalised once we followed all assessments and whatnot. And it was thankfully only a year the second time round. With the contact on that part, because the attendance was only working out roughly about once a quarter, that's what we decided, myself and my partner, to do with that, as the sheriff actually noted we didn't require to do a contact. It was very much up to ourselves to do that if we wanted to. Obviously, we wanted to keep that bond as much as possible. Unfortunately, when the second childcare round, the inconsistent contact started with obviously their 4-week assessment on this time round, and then it depleted thereafter into contact centre. So obviously with that combined experiences, we thought that would be the best route forward, was to kind of just try and do that 4 times a quarter. However, the support that we got kind of second time round, obviously the contact centre again were absolutely brilliant on that part, but because the contacts weren't happening, and the last time that I suppose my niece would have seen the birth parents was in January of 2020, so we're talking quite a large amount of time since the first child had seen the birth parents. And the second time round with my nephew, obviously was very inconsistent, and that wasn't just face-to-face but also virtual. So essentially that it's now gone into letterbox contact, because it's just the trajectory that it's followed, which social work on this part have been pretty great in helping us facilitate that.
Good. It just strikes me listening to you, just Alana, just how complex all that is. And I mean, those kind of links between children and their birth families are kind of complex wherever they end up, whether they're in foster care or in kinship care or whatever. But often it feels like there are those added layers of complication for kinship carers, and yet kinship carers probably get the least support in relation to that in terms of just how to manage that. So it is interesting that you were left managing that, and all the kind of the feelings that are associated with that, as well as all the kind of just the practicalities of what's happening and what's not happening for the children. Exactly.
Yeah, it's I guess it's like a spider's web. There's so many things that you have to think about and get involved with, and unfortunately there's a lot of things that you have to kind of go off your own back and try and facilitate, including things like our sibling contact as well, as they have older siblings. However, we initiated that off our own backs with the siblings' adopted parents, and we have brilliant contact with them, which is quite sparse to what the birth parents had actually painted a picture of. So that in itself has, we've kind of extended our family just through being in this experience, which is great. However, one of the other siblings on the paternal side were unable to get in touch with him. As unfortunately a social work intervention to reach out hasn't been successful at this point. So yes, but we're still trying.
and it's great you've been able to do that, and because again that was one of those recurring themes from the care review about brothers and sisters having lost those connections at these kind of transition points when they come into care, and particularly if you have some children in kinship care or some and others in foster care or adoption or whatever it is. So it's brilliant, Alana, that you've been able to initiate that and make it work. But one of the things we're coming to later on in the morning is life story work, and I just wonder, has that's been an issue that you've looked at, or that people have discussed with you, or that you've had support with?
We've been mentioned it a few times, and also been offered the training through the training calendars, which are sent out. However, they're always scheduled on working days for me, which I work full time, so really quite difficult when they're scheduled, you know, on a Wednesday morning. So obviously I would have to kind of take the day out to do that. Obviously, if there was nighttime or weekend courses, that would be brilliant, or even virtual. You know, I could deal with that as well. Obviously, at the moment, the children are still quite relatively young. However, the 4-year-old is starting to get quite curious, although the birth parents are virtually strangers. You know, that these questions are going to soon start coming, and it would be great to, I suppose, be a little bit better equipped on how we could deal with that age range. And also I find that the courses that I have been on, they're quite foster care centric. So obviously there could be a little bit more relevant to kinship carers or kinship children that are involved, whether it's the material or just being able to just do it specifically to a kinship carer group. So like I said, the last time I went to one, that I was literally one of 2 kinship carers out of about 12 people. So yeah.
No, I think that's a really important point from today's conference as well, that a lot of the issues are very similar when you start from the child's perspective, but actually the context in which you're having to provide the care and the relationships you have with the other people are quite different, and therefore, you know, the support and the way that you're able to do that needs to be different as well. I was just thinking about the whole process of becoming a kinship carer. Can you think about what would have been useful in terms of the support that might have been or could have been around for you?
Yeah, I think the initial kind of knowledge and support groups would have been quite beneficial, even before the placement. I know in some cases we only had, you know, 2 weeks to prepare, but other than having to prepare for a newborn child, just knowing exactly what the kinship process was going to be would have been great, or even just knowing who I could reach out to have a chat about it and say, like, give me the real life story, what's going to happen here. You know, have we got the resilience for this, which we already knew we did, you know, but we wouldn't have put our hands up otherwise if that was the case. But God, I don't think anybody really actually knows what they're going to get themselves into, even with as much support as possible. I think it would have just lightened that burden just a little bit. You know, the focus is that child. That's all you can ever think about. But as I said earlier, you know, your focus is that child left, right, and centre for several months until it all catches up with you. And at that point is where you do need people, and knowing that you have that down the line if you need it would have been great. I think other things as well, things like finances, there's not really much explained about that in regards to entitlements. Obviously, it's not about the money when it's kinship care, as we all know that. It is about the kinship element of that and raising that child. But, you know, we had the 2 weeks to prepare, and obviously payments didn't come in until like about 3 months later. So, you know, you had to essentially juggle your finances, you had to juggle your work. So thankfully my work were absolutely brilliant, and they allowed me to kind of work reduced hours, and my partner's mother has been quite a key player in that. So I think support of family as well is quite a big one. Unfortunately, I've been let down quite a lot by my family in that part, but my partner's family have been brilliant. And nobody prepares you that family connections will become quite tested at that point. And again, just looking at things like work leave as well, that's always been quite passionate for me since I've come on board with the KCAS thing. Obviously, per law, there is no actual paid leave for kinship carers. And that's quite fundamental, especially where you're taking on a child with trauma. or even just a newborn child. You know, everybody knows like there's leave when you've got a newborn child, just to help you adapt to that child being in the home and allowing the child to adapt, and to build that bond with yourself. So things like that would have been quite great, and mental health support as well. I think, as I noted earlier, being able to know that there is that people there to talk to, you know, that would have probably better prepared even myself, or even for the second time round, you know, okay, just laying it all out, basically have somebody to speak to, because yes, you can speak to your partner till you're blue in the face, but realistically it's quite an isolating experience, you know, unless you are actually speaking to other kinship carers. If you're able to reach out to them, some people are not comfortable to do that. And also a simpler booklet, which obviously we're talking about that today. But the things that I found when we got this chunky kind of novel looking booklet beforehand, it was quite confusing what parts actually were meant for us, you know, just knowing the key points, the legal aspect, the support, the finances, and the links and where to find them, and also where to reach out for support, which so far from my involvement with the KCAS, we're starting to see these things that we should have seen long ago.
Alana, do you want to say something about the booklet that KCAS and particularly the advisory group have been creating, that the minister referred to earlier? And maybe while you're speaking, Simon, I think you said you might be able to flash it up on the screen so that people can at least see what it looks like. Yeah, that's what it looks like. So Alana, can you just say a wee bit about where that emerged from and what it is, and then I'll say a bit about how people can get their hands on it. Yeah,
so I'm extremely, I suppose, proud to have been able to be part of the KCAS advisory group who fed in to obviously KCAS and helping provide a booklet that is easier to digest. As I suppose after the world, basically as you knew it, has just been turned on its head. Obviously the previous literature, as I've noted, was clunky. It was hard to determine what was relevant to your situation, and obviously where you could go to gain further clarification. But the What Now booklet also was created in partnership with KCAS and the Kinship Advisory Group. It also provides a literature that is more relevant. In my opinion, it instills hope rather than the fear, and it perfectly marries up the available support that KCAS and other organisations have to provide, which I think is that touching point that people need to know that there is somebody to talk to with whatever situation you have going on. That booklet will help point you in the right direction, and that we now have that support to help kinship carers, and we just need to let people know that it's there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon, for sharing that. And as you can see, that is, if you go to kinship.scot, that's one of the pages that you see. If you click on the information and resources tab, and it takes you to that What Now booklet where you can download it. There are some hard copies. I might get this wrong, but I think a number of hard copies will be sent to the local authorities and are available. If you would like a hard copy, I think you can email the kinship.scot email address again on the site there and ask for one to be sent to you, and you can get that. If apologies to anybody if I've got that completely wrong, but I think that's basically it. So thanks, Simon, for sharing that. And Alana, we could go on, and but we're kind of out of time really, but a huge thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think we were talking earlier on about part of the purpose of the week is occasionally to stand back and just recognize what people are contributing as kinship carers. I think, although that wasn't what you were saying, it's just so evident about the amazing contribution you've made for those two children, and but also really interesting to hear your insights about what it's been like and what would be useful for you, and the things that other people and practitioners and agencies need to be thinking about in order to provide better and more effective support. I know you're, at least I hope you're going to be able to stay around, family commitments permitting and work commitments permitting, and again acknowledging that you would also have other work commitments if you weren't doing this for us today. So I hope you're going to stay around and be part of the Q&A discussion later on in the mornings. But just
I'll be
finally,
there.
many thanks on behalf of everybody for sharing that, Alana. That's been great.
No,
So
thank you for having me.
We're as we said before, please stick any comments or questions for Alana in the Q&A section. But we're now going to move on to the second part of the presentation. So, Sally, I don't know whether you can find the button that makes you appear and sort of like Zebedee from the ether, or I can see you. I can see Anne as well, looking slightly concerned in the background. But you just need to unmute yourself and you'll be there.
There you go. Hi, that's it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
You can hear me.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you, and thank you for. I know you've come into the office to actually be there in person to have all the technology at your disposal. But could I, for the benefit of other people who don't know Sally, could I just briefly introduce Sally as a trainer and consultant? I don't know, practitioners. Well, I've been around in social work for a very long time, and I think for as long as I can remember, Sally has been there as sort of beacon of light and good sense and wisdom that makes people's lives just that little bit easier. I think an awful lot of carers and practitioners can feel completely overwhelmed sometimes by the complexity of what they're dealing with and by the pain and distress of some of the children they're working with. And it's, you know, finding your way through the labyrinth of legal processes or caring for a child who's incredibly hard to reach can make it extraordinarily difficult. And to have somebody like Sally who's able to cut through some of that and find a way of making it make some more sense and more manageable. And I think, Sally, what you've already brought for me is that ability to come back to where is the child in all of this, and what are the particular issues that we need to understand about this child and the particular relationships that they have with people, and therefore the particular supports that they need and the people around about them need, and it just bringing it back to the child and cuts through some of that complexity and gives people a way forward. So thank you for being, well, you're a bit of a legend, to be frank, Sally, in terms of but thank you so much for bringing that insight and particularly for joining us today to share some of that in relation to the thinking around kinship care. And so I'll pass over to you for the next presentation.
Thank you, Robin. Yes, we've been around together for a long time, sort of swan songs, because you're retiring and I should be retiring. I'm sure I've been around for far too long. I'm just thrilled to be able to speak with folk today. I wish we were face to face. What an irony that we're talking about relationships, building, retaining relationships, and we're not even face to face. So that just feels like the biggest irony, really. I'm just so powerfully struck by what Alana said and the complexity of trying to care protectively for very young children right in the middle of the complex extended family circle, and how much support is absolutely crucial at all the different stages of that process. I'm really heartened to hear about all the developments, because I've been around such a long time and I've just heard so many kinship carers, been alongside them saying, where is the support that we need? You know, how are we going to link together? The support groups are absolutely vital, but so are the professional services, I think, to give advice and support to kinship carers directly. So really important. Those aspects of support are readily available to kinship carers. What I'm going to do is talk with you about the perspectives of different parties in contact in terms of maintaining relationships in kinship care, and talking about, from the perspective of the different parties, some of the things that they say that come through in the research, but also affirmed by my own practice. And whereas Alana was talking very much about young children and how you try to take care of their needs, both now and thinking to the future, I'll also be talking about what older children have said about what they want from contacts in kinship care and what will help them. And also birth parents, but principally what do carers say about what they absolutely need. And how fitting that we began with Alana's voice, so powerful, so clear, so empathic, and just couldn't be a better way to start. So I'm actually going to be talking through a series of slides which may come up, I hope, Simon. Oh, there we are. Right, okay, just thank you. That's wonderful. We'll kind of click through. This is, it looks as though it might be what my sons would call slow death by PowerPoint. It's not intended to be something that you read through religiously as I'm talking. I'm just going to talk about some themes that really strike me as being particularly pertinent right now in the Scottish context, in terms of contact in kinship care. But I think you'll be getting, you can get the slides and you can have more of a look at the points I've made and the references, particularly at the end. So what I'm going to be saying is drawn from what research there is around, and there isn't actually a lot of Scottish research at all, asking partners, in those partners, the child, the birth relative and the carer, about their perspective. But there was some in 2010, so I've looked at that, but also at the sort of broader British and international research about contact in kinship care. And there are many themes, I think, that come from that really resonate with the predicament of carers trying to do the best for the children in a Scottish context. So I just want to think firstly, Simon, about the landscape for kinship care in Scotland. And this is just so profound. My word, are there challenges? And I'm going to talk about some of the challenges, but wow, are there opportunities? And we're crazy if we don't make the most of these opportunities. There's been legislation just recently. We've been thinking about that in terms of the promise. Minister talking about the promise and a commitment to delivering services that make a difference to children, and of course that means kinship care. But there is such a chance to actually deliver what Alana needed at the very beginning, and what she and her partner have needed right the way through to support them in caring for the children. So this legislation is really profound. There's such explicit support for kinship care as the preferred option of care if children can't remain with their parents. So there's an increase in kinship placements, and there has been for some considerable time, and that I'm sure is going to continue. So it's really important that we're able to rely on provision that makes a difference to kinship carers and to the children. So when we're thinking about kinship care, of course, we've got the widest range. Some of the situations that I've been in have been with very young children who may or may not go home, going through the kind of process that Alana and her partner have been through, and others with much older children, young people, who are newly interested in re-establishing connection, perhaps with lost birth family members, or with dealing with the complexity, the emotional complexity at different stages of their development of maintaining that link. And some of those links are painful and challenging emotionally. So we've got the widest range of circumstances that we're thinking about as the landscape, from informal arrangements, kinship care orders under which children aren't are no longer looked after by the local authority, or other court orders through child protection processes. And some placements are temporary, others longer term, or as in Alana's situation, turn out to be permanent in the end. There's a motion sensitive light in this room, and if you don't move around, it goes off after about 20 minutes. So I might disappear to the dark again, but fortunately Anne's with me and she's waved her hand, so here we are with some "Let There Be Light." Okay, so I'm just aware that there's just a widest range of circumstances, and what I want to just remind us of next is the needs that children bring to kinship care. So that's the next slide, please, Simon. Okay, so Robin alluded to this, and this is the huge kind of irony. There's been so much more support for foster carers and adopters, and of course I would, entirely agree with that, but there's been so much more support as of right for those carers than there has for kinship carers. And when we look at the needs that children bring to kinship care, of course they're the same. And I think some of the confusions may be greater because some of the circumstances in which they may come suddenly, in emergency, and the chap on the door, as Anne calls it here, where suddenly you're expected to care for children who are extremely confused. And behind that, quite often, if we're thinking about contact issues, we have to take into account that many of the children come with unresolved losses, experiences, sadly, of abuse and neglect, all kinds of other needs, just very similar to the needs of children who are placed in foster care. Same needs, really. And there needs to be as much support for carers who are taking on the complexity of the individual needs of the child from the very beginning of the journey in the placement. So there may be health problems, there may be specific learning delays, unidentified learning needs, but also the profound emotional impact and the challenge for carers of being protective and nurturing, but also maintaining important links. And what we know is that meetings with birth relatives, be their parents, siblings, other relatives, they may rekindle past hurts. How do we address that? Richard's going to be talking about communicating directly with children, how we listen to them, how we address their needs. Or contact can offer opportunities for healing. So it's thinking about what are the particular needs of each child and how do we address those needs in the support that we offer to everyone around the process of contact. I'm using the word contact. I know that it's a very unpopular word now. We talk about family time, but for children in kinship care, they're in their families. Does family time make sense as a way of describing it? Seeing mum and dad or seeing my brothers and sisters might be a better way, but I'm just using contact as a shorthand. So moving on and thinking about what the support needs are for carers in these circumstances. Can we have the next slide, Simon, please? So the support needs, so the widest range of placements. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We know that there are many situations which are really settled, where there are highly collaborative relationships between carers, birth parents, siblings who are not able to live with the children placed in the kinship placement. But at the other end of the continuum, there are highly conflicted relationships between parents and carers. And I think Alana was alluding to that. You know, it started off okay, but then heightened feelings, particularly at different points of decision making, can make the relationships highly conflictual and really stressful for carers to deal with. So the contact can be stressful for parents, for the children, as Alana highlighted, and also for the carers. And in some families, this requires ongoing, highly skilled support. And so it needs to be available as of right to carers who are looking after children who have the same needs as any child who's been separated and who may have experienced a range of other adversities. And what we know from the research, Joan Hunt, who's done just a researcher who's written about 2 decades of research into kinship care, what she is still saying is that the carers report highly variable availability of support. And some carers still expected to manage arrangements where there's parents are unpredictable, they're unpredictable in their attendance, their behaviour, of the presentation. And there are other situations which might begin as settled situations, but actually require occasional focused intervention. So the question that Alana raised is so pertinent. How do you get into the system to get that support if you only, you haven't needed it? How do you negotiate access to the kind of support you need? So the landscape needs to be really, really clear so that families know how to get the kind of help that they need. I want to go on to talk about what children and young people tell us. So this is from some of the research, also thinking about what young people looked at who've care experienced say about in the Independent Care Review about their experiences. And one of the strongest points is that a number of young people feel that they're often not meaningfully consulted about who they want to see and in what kind of circumstances. And some would say, so if we're talking about the most challenging, difficult end emotionally, some young people say they felt pressured to see relatives, especially parents, who they've come to a point of wanting to see less frequently or even not at all at a particular point. Alana's talking about very young children when you have to make decisions on their behalf, thinking as carefully as you can about their needs and vulnerabilities. But when we're thinking about young people, we need to be hearing their changing views, their developing views. If there's one thing about this landscape of contact and kinship care, it is that there will be change. Because children grow, develop, different stages of development. Of course, they have different questions about their history, what happened and why, whose fault was that, who's responsible for that. So kinship carers are often caring for children who are full of self-blame and who need help to make sense of what's happened to them. The children and young people often say that contact with mothers, they want it, the mothers who they can't live with in the long term, but acknowledging that can come with pain and challenge. And one of the most difficult decisions, I think, and one that we carers need support with thinking about is what's the difference between distressing contact and harmful contact? Because some contact may be distressing but important and still wanted by the children, but other contact can unravel the child in terms of their ability to settle and their ability to recover developmentally. So these questions are really difficult, and that's where professional support, as alongside support from peer carers, is really important. One thing that I think we haven't got right, we're still seeing situations where contact with fathers is much more commonly lost than with mothers, although actually it may be experienced as less stressful by children, young people, and actually bring benefits, certainly in terms of identity, as well as the kind of comfort, help to make sense of what's happened and why, readily available to children, young people. So the message is we want to be listened to, we want to be heard, we want to be consulted sensitively, and if we need support in contact, we want it to be light touch. I think the universal message is everybody, all the parties, hate contact which is closely supervised in confined settings with virtually no resources for any meaningful interaction. So what are carers telling us is what I want to just, and this will, I mean, I'm speaking to the converted, I'm sure, those carers amongst you and those kinship care workers amongst you. Some feel abandoned by professionals, not only by professionals, but also family members. And I think, you know, Lana alluded to this actually in what she said so powerfully, is that sometimes you think, oh, well, I'll have my family around me. But actually, a number of kinship carers say they feel newly isolated in their family system because other people kind of disappear. So I think about, you know, what might help with that just as we go along. Skilled support is so greatly valued, but not universally available. So the challenge is to make it more universally available so that carers know where to go for the support and it is readily accessible. Stress is often most acute, surprise, surprise, when carers are expected to supervise contact with parents who resent their role. And I think Alana alluded to that from her own life circumstances, just, you know, in that powerful beginning to today. And, you know, they may be supervising time between parents and children when there's acute conflict and even threats of violence. So they carers will say they want readily available, skilled support around face-to-face meetings. So with the emphasis on skill, and carers saying so powerfully through Joan Hunt's research that actually a skilled worker is worth their weight in gold. If they know the territory, they know the issues, really it's so much easier for carers to explain what the issues are and also to discuss what might be helpful. Mediation, where is the mediation in relationships with birth parents? Because those mediation skills can be crucially important, but when are they available? And wanting increased support from wider family, not always available. And Richard's going to talk about life story work later in the morning. And he's going to talk about the crucial issue of communication, how we listen to children, how we really hear them. What I've always been exercised about is that life story work, support with making sense of what's happened to you and why, isn't automatically available to children, young people in kinship care. In fact, much less commonly than children, even in permanent foster care, never mind in adoption. So Richard's going to take us into a process of thinking about that, which is going to be really helpful, I think, and interesting to folk. And carers say they want help about how to talk with children, how to help them around contact that's painful, difficult, confusing, particularly where there are conflicts of loyalty, etc., and preparing them for meetings with birth relatives, and also how to support them in recovery, how to comfort them. When is it the time to make a different kind of decision, to do it differently? All those variations in arrangement that Alana alluded to earlier on when she was speaking. I just want to talk next about contact with brothers and sisters. And I want to just say that you know, Alana's example mirrors many of my own experiences, which is that contact with brothers and sisters can be so enriching and so comforting and so important for identity, for many other reasons. But it's also important to say that it's not always without problems and complexities. So I'll just say a bit more about that in a minute, but it depends on the circumstances. And that's the issue for kinship carers, is every situation is unique, and even between different brothers and sisters, their feelings about what's happened, the sense they make of what's happened may vary. And so you might be dealing with children who have rather different views about those kinds of links, even sibling links, never mind parental links. So if children, young people, care experienced folk in the independent care review were saying really strongly, you know, we need this contact with our brothers and sisters. We should have a right to it. So the new legislation really affirms that. One thing, though, I think for us to be careful of is some of the children may have had long journeys. They may have been in and out of different sorts of placement options away from home before they come to kinship care. And it may be that we are not all as clear as we might be about who are the children they view as siblings. So it may not all only be blood-related children. I'm just thinking about children that I was involved in some planning for a while ago, where there were two children who'd been in foster care together, who were not blood-related, but who actually had a really powerful sibling bond. And who actually, you know, when plans were made for them, that needed to be really front and center in the thinking about their needs. So why might contact with brothers and sisters be less than straightforward? Just in my conversations with local authority workers recently, you know, everyone's been saying this is so helpful, the new legislation, but it does actually throw up problems in some families, in that children may, in sibling groups, may well have been given, allocated different roles in their birth family as perhaps favourite, scapegoats, which can complicate their encounters. So it's of course important. I mean, some of those links, if we're saying like Alana's experience, will be straightforward and natural and so fruitful, not just now, but for the future, for making sense of what's happened over time and etc. But other situations may be more difficult, more complicated. And for some children, contact even with siblings may trigger traumatic memories or undermine the security of the kinship placement. Now, that's a small number of situations, but I think some carers may have had that kind of experience, and we need to be thinking very carefully about how we establish and maintain meaningful links. If for a period of time, and again, I'll say, if there's one thing that's certain, it's that things will change. If for a period of time, it's not appropriate for siblings to be together because one child is particularly emotionally vulnerable and finds that very difficult, we still need to keep those really meaningful links, and we need to be really clear and to be recording and to be talking with children and young people about why those decisions are made at particular times. But for the kinship carers, they may be caught in a really difficult situation in which they need someone to talk to think through what's best right now and how do we keep those links in a way that's meaningful. So that's just a small number of situations, and many situations there will be what Alana described, comfort, etc., with for the children from those links. And we are the children's historians, and local authorities need to be making sure that kinship carers not only are supported to keep those links with existing siblings, but also what about the new siblings who come along? What about later born siblings? So really important that carers are linked in with systems that actually inform them really effectively of any changes. So I want to think about contact with extended families and the extended family members next. And the message here is, I think children and young people say, we need as many significant folk from our extended family network to be in touch with us as possible. Don't just assume it's parents we want to see. It may be actually that some children and young people in really complex circumstances that I've worked with over the years, actually wider family members may be able to offer comfort, support, help in making sense of their circumstances, which parents are sadly compromised from doing at a particular point in time. So contact with cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, often comforting and valued. Now, many kinship carers will be aware of that. They'll know that, oh, we've gone into the dark again. There we are. So many will know that, but some kinship carers say that when they take children into their families on a kinship basis, actually some of those links with extended family weaken, and that also not only disadvantages the carers in terms of support, but it also disadvantages the children in the short and long term. And these contacts can be so rich. They can provide and actually provide some respite. I think Alana was saying earlier, you know, goodness me, with a newborn and all the change that was going on, where was the respite? How can we actually think about that? How can we anticipate the need for that so that carers aren't in a situation of crisis and exhaustion before that happens? Okay, so I want to go on to think about what parents say about contact in kinship, because they will often say, you know, I'm just thinking about particularly some Australian research where parents had a lot to say about the circumstances of contact, and they hate this kind of closely supervised contact as much as anything, but they also really often dislike circumstances in which there's disagreement between them and their family members who are caring for their children, and yet the family members are actually supervising or supporting the contact meeting. So they often feel blamed, excluded from opportunities to contribute meaningfully. So, and the close supervision in some awful venues, there are some awful venues for contact, particularly in local authorities. I'm laughing. I have lived half my life in these venues professionally. It is time that we actually created much more pleasant opportunities for folk to get together, so there's some chance of having some meaningful interaction. So a lot of parents say, yes, we feel supported and we feel included. There's almost shared care in a natural way. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But that is not the case for everyone. And some mothers will say that the loss of maternal role is particularly painful, acutely painful, and they often feel at a loss as to how to make a contribution. So what support is there for them as well to kind of make a meaningful have a meaningful role with their children? And I'm harping on again about fathers again, because oh my goodness, they just seem to lose contact with the children much more frequently even than mothers do in difficult circumstances. And it can also deprive children of the support from paternal family. Now, I can remember, and Robin will remember this, there was research in 1989 that said we were not doing well in including fathers and paternal family as meaningful people in children's lives. Goodness me, I don't think we're that much better at it now. So that really is important, because it's so important for identity. And depending on family dynamics, you know, it can happen that the paternal family's excluded. And acute conflict with carers is less common for fathers. I mean, it does happen, but it's less common. And if we think about the implications for identity, I think it's obvious. So just going on to think about what's needed. Okay, so this is in the reference at the end of what I've put together. There's this reference to Aya et al. And this is a really terrific study of all the research into contact. So it looks at research into contact in foster care, adoption, but also kinship care. And there are these conclusions that actually well-facilitated contact, we kind of underline that, is associated with positive outcomes for children and young people in all kinds of placements, both temporary and long-term. But poorly managed contact can really undermine children's well-being. So we really need to be thinking about support for everyone involved: children, carers, adoptive parents, birth relatives. And it depends on the investment of time and resources. And I think today and this week are just an opportunity to really underline that actually what's needed, the outcome of all these wonderful developments in Scotland legally and in terms of practice, it is really, we need the investment of time and resources to make a difference to that kind of support that's available. So thinking next, Simon, about what helps. So clear purposes for family links. So it's not always the case that we see situations in which everybody is clear, including the child, young person, about, you know, what are we trying to do with maintaining these links? Are we working towards a return home? Some children in kinship care, they don't know what is happening. They don't know what the plan is. They're really not clear about what the purposes are for the contact. And just thinking about what the research tells us and really underlined by my own kind of practice experience is that we need to think about how can family time with parents, siblings, can it actually support placement stability? And if placement stability is at risk, still at risk, when we've tried to help everyone to work towards supporting the placement, then it may even be necessary for face-to-face meetings to be paused or stopped for the moment. So I'm just thinking about the work of the psychologists in Scotland, Chris Burke and his colleague Anne Woodhouse, who put together a training program that I'm going to be involved with, which just encourages us to think about what are the purposes of contact in longer term placements. So of course that will include many kinship placements. How can we contact arrangements be supported so that they really do contribute to the stability of the placement, and we can keep it going, but also make it safe and meaningful? And just thinking about the kind of beneficial purposes, other beneficial purposes, apart from supporting the placement, those are kind of, I think, some fairly obvious kind of potential beneficial purposes. But if we're not clear why we're organising contact at the moment, are we working towards return home? Are we not? Are we, keeping a meaningful link? Are we supporting parents to help children to make sense of their circumstances? Then if we know why we're doing it, then the arrangements should actually flow from that. How often, in what circumstances, with what support. So being clear about purposes can really help. So I just want to go on, Simon, to think about some useful questions. And these are questions I have in my head often when I'm thinking about how can contact be beneficial. So can contact help to heal past hurts? Time with birth parents, time with siblings. Can it help to heal past hurts? And how might it do that? Is there a possibility that a parent can be supported to acknowledge some issues when the child was at home, that actually relieves the child of self-blame and helps them to settle? Does the contact, or can it be worked with to support developmental recovery? Because that's actually what carers are doing. They're actually helping children to heal, to recover developmentally, and to feel good about themselves, to feel confident, and to have positive self-esteem. So thinking about, what work might be needed at different points to actually reach, get some positive focus to the work with the different parties in order to make contact safe and meaningful. Okay, so on to the identification of support needs for all parties. So I think when we're thinking about what carers might want at different points in time, not always, but at particular points in time, they may need some support to think about what preparation is needed for the child or young person. When children are very wee, and then, that's not so much of an issue, but very quickly, as children grow and develop, they need good preparation. And are carers supported with that? Are they supported to think about what facilitation or support in the contact meeting, wherever it happens, can ensure that the family links are both safe and meaningful? And if this professional support is needed, how might it be protective but unobtrusive, so that it's not like policing, undermining the potential benefits of meaningful links? And one of the key points for me is, how will these impacts of meetings be reviewed? Do we have simple mechanisms for carers to know that actually someone's going to think with them about, do things need to change? How are things going? What help do you need to be supporting the child or children, etc. So there isn't always a reliable mechanism for reviewing situations, and some families, kinship families, will be in situations where things are settled for ages, and then suddenly actually there's a problem, there's a difficulty. If there's no mechanism for checking in, then there at least needs to be a simple mechanism for carers to lodge into reliable support, to be thinking about what's in the child's best interests. Okay, so changing needs for support over time, that's what carers say. They say, it changes. And just in Alana's story, really how things changed, how the support for contact, the needs for support for contact change, how the decisions were, and they were really big decisions, and how on earth do you actually approach that when you're kinship carers and you aren't expecting the complexity, especially if children aren't able to return home and there are some big decisions made about how they might be secured in your care. Okay, so how can services anticipate the needs that families will have at different points in time? So it need to be as responsive as possible. It's just terrifically helpful that there's advice available. This Kinship Care Advisory is so important, so valuable. But carers also need localized support. They need, a local hub where they know they can turn to. They need other carers to talk to, but also professionals who have experience. Okay, so what resources might help is the next thing I want to think about. So what the research, Joan Hunt, who's really been listening to kinship carers for 20 years in her research, what she says is that really, alongside all the peer support mechanisms, which are crucial, carers often want skilled practitioners. with expertise in the complex issues of kinship care. These issues they're additionally complex. I would argue they're more complex than for foster carers and adopters very often, even more complex, because there you are still in your family system, dealing with all the kind of ups and downs, all the casual contacts that might happen, all the influences from birth family that you then have to negotiate for yourselves as the carers, but also on behalf of the children. So support for all parties really needs to be readily available as needed. And I would say again, mediation. You know, are we actually, are carers able to access workers who are skilled in mediation? Because sometimes in difficult, fraught situations, mediation can help to negotiate something beyond an acute conflict and avoid things going back to court, etc. Very, very, very important, I think. Therapeutic services for children struggling with impact of past adversities. And Richard's going to talk about this. Our next session after the break, Richard's going to talk about his just immense experience of working directly with children and the importance of a therapeutic stance in our listening to children's needs, be it through what they're able to tell us, but also through what their behaviour tells us in different circumstances in kinship care. So contact centres, interesting. And I think we need to move much more towards well-resourced community circumstances in which contact can be supported appropriately and can still be safe, but be well-resourced and staffed by experienced folk. What a lot of families from Australia were saying, birth mothers in particular, were saying, you know, it's so difficult when we've been in child protection processes, it's so fraught and there's so much conflict. Actually, can we not move to an approach that actually supports us with the aftermath and thinks about the family system and how the family system can be supported to actually acknowledge the parent's potential contribution to the child's well-being, rather than lodged in particular role expectations. And mothers will say they feel very blamed for not being a good mother. They find it really difficult to negotiate their role in contact. So post child protection in particular, how can we actually do that? So thinking about next, Simon, a family systems focus. So there are different ways of doing this, and one of the ways of doing this is family group decision making. I've been involved the last few years much more closely with the potential for family group decision making to actually make a difference in all kinds of circumstances where children aren't able to be at home. And particularly just thinking here about kinship care. And this is not universally available, but it's very much supported as an approach to work with families in the promise. It's explicitly supported as a way of working with families. And it's a way of actually consulting with families in a way that brings in everyone who may be significant, who may be able to offer support to the child or young person, and actually consults with them about, from a basis of what the child's needs are, so it's child-centered. It takes away the focus on who's responsible for this. Is it the mother, the father, you know, domestic violence, whatever is the reason. And it actually, from a bottom line of what the child's needs are and any concerns about the child's well-being, it actually works to give the family members, so kith and kin, who's important, the opportunity on their own without professionals to actually come up with a plan that can address the child's needs in a meaningful way. And this is beginning to be used in different parts of the country. It's not universally available, but it's growing like topsy. And it can be used in different ways to promote meaningful links between children in different placements, for example, foster care, adoption, home and parental care. But also I'm thinking for carers who feel like the rest of the family disappears. Early doors, when decisions are being made about the child can't be at home, who's going to care for them, actually set a different kind of landscape where the carers may take primary responsibility, but actually there's a contribution from other family members who can provide respite, contact, meaningful links for the child over time. So if that's an option to think about, as is the next one, lifelong links family rights group. So this is a service offering support to children and young people who aren't able to live at home. So Simon, it's just a very brief slide. Okay, so this also may be available in your area, or it may be coming to your area. So this is a family rights group in England who've actually supported the development of this service for children and young people in long-term care away from home, identifying lost family members who may be able to support the child, battery running low, and also meaningful links which support the separated child in a sense of identity. Okay, so I'm really coming to the end of what I want to say. So I want just to emphasize in the next slide that I've talked about the complexity of contact in some circumstances, but also wanting to think about the opportunity for contact to act in a therapeutic manner to help children, to help them with their story and to help them to move forward. And this is really what Richard's going to talk a great deal about this. There's some lovely authors, Sydney and Price, who write about supporting contact for children in all kinds of different placements away from home, including kinship. And they explore ways in which we might work with colleagues as professionals to support contact having a therapeutic purpose and focus for children, because making sense of your history is really crucial. It helps in every kind of way, as Richard, I know, is going to explore with you. Training for workers and carers, oh my goodness. Yes, so that needs to be on the agenda. So last words. So the final kind of slide, just from this canter through the kind of landscape of kinship care and some themes. So it's my view that children in kinship care, their carers and their birth relatives have the right to expect skilled support to ensure safe and meaningful contact. So let's hope that all the good news that really is coming from the government, or the really positive legislative changes, actually bear meaningful fruit, and bear meaningful fruit all around the country. No postcode lottery for support. So if the promise is to be kept and its aims truly met, there should be equitable services countrywide. And carers are saying they value workers who know their onions. Please give us someone who really knows what we're talking about, so we don't have to explain endlessly and renegotiate every time. And I'm just thinking about the really positive developments that have been described this morning in a kind of the introduction, Alana's involvement in the Kinship Support Advisory Service, and the kinds of the important ways that carers' voices are being heard now in the kinds of decisions that are going to be made about the future. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you so much. I hope that's rung some bells for you. I'm excited actually from the introduction to this morning from the Minister, and also some of the developments that Alana was talking about. I think we've a long way to go, but we have many opportunities to make a difference. Thank you.
Sally, thank you very much for that. As ever, there's so many issues and so much complexity, and yet somehow you managed to steer a clear path through that in terms of helping make sense of it, but also that bit about, well, what do you do about that? What do you do if you're a kinship carer or a kind of somebody who's working with kinship carers whose job it is to provide support, or somebody who's responsible for policy and development in locally or nationally. So thank you very, very much. And coping with lights that go out and batteries that go flat as well in the middle of it, it's been really, really helpful. As we mentioned before, we're going to have a coffee break. If you have any questions that arise from what Sally said or from what Alana said, please do stick them in the Q&A over the coffee break. Again, well, Rich is going to do his input when we come back, but Sally will be with us and Alana will be with us for the end section as well. So if you have questions or comments that you want to put to them, stick them in the Q&A over the coffee break or afterwards, and we'll pick them up at the end. So it's just about 11:30. Sally, that was perfect timing. Well done. We said we'd take 15 minutes. So if we come back, we'll restart probably at 11:45 once people have had a decent break, and go on from there. So many thanks, and see you shortly. Hello again, Richard.
Hello, Robin. How are you?
Good, good.
It's going very well. It's very, very enjoyable, and I'm learning a lot of things here. So I hope everybody else is also, enjoying it. Are you happy then for me to be co-host for the sharing the screen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, great.
If you need anything sensible, technically, Simon's your man rather than me. But,
okay, no worries. That's fine.
He's on the case.
Lovely.
It was a bit mean of us to put Sally in a room with the lights going out every 10 minutes.
Yeah, I thought that was a bit horrible, wasn't it? But then that's about giving electric and being sensible and all those wonderful things.
It keeps your steps up when you're in that office. You have to stand up every now and again.
Ah, fair enough. I'm just going to just try my screen, just make sure I can share it then.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Yeah, lovely.
No,
Perfect.
That's looking good.
Lovely, brilliant. I'll just put that in minimal now. Fantastic.
We'll just wait for Simon to give us the nod that folk are back and not waiting for anything.
So a couple of people had lost their link, I think, during that break, but there is still the overwhelming majority of participants live. So I would just go for it when you're ready, Richard and Robin.
Good. Thank you very much, Simon. And so we'll plow on. And
yeah, lovely.
Richard, thank you so much for joining us today. I've heard you speak before, and it was great. And I've read some of your stuff, and I kind of vaguely thought I knew what you did and who you were. And but then I thought, well, I better just do a quick Google and see if I've missed anything. And frankly, if I spent some time going through all the things you've done and achieved and been involved in, we'll probably spend most of the rest of the morning be going through that. So apologies for the abbreviated version, but the abbreviated version is that you've developed this therapeutic life story work approach and set up and run the Therapeutic Life Story Work International, which, as the name suggests, has traction across many different countries and has been hugely influential and really, really valuable development for practitioners in Scotland, but also elsewhere. So we're absolutely delighted that you're able to come along and talk about that work in relation to kinship care and as part of Kinship Care Week. So I'll pass over to you and switch myself off for the time being.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, hello everybody, and thank you so much for the opportunity to come and speak with you today. And having heard Alana and Sally, I think that what I have to say hopefully will complement a lot of the experiences, but also to think around the importance of stories and the importance of life story work. It's something that we see growing exponentially across the world, which is brilliant for me. 25 years now of doing therapeutic life story work and seeing the benefits, not just for young people, but for their families. And I wanted to say really from the beginning that although most of our therapeutic life story work does happen within foster or adoption situations, I'm a practitioner first and foremost. I work with 11 young people across the country, of which 3 of those young people actually live within their family of origin or within a kinship care arrangement where it's not gone through any kind of care order process. And although there are different elements of the approach that we might choose, the concept is really the same, which is these are very challenging situations where young people may have experienced things that have shaped their understanding of how the world works and how they must work within that world to survive. And someone who is now caring for them needs to not only be able to meet their needs, but also to understand their needs, but also, you know, in that sense, be able to feel that they are making a difference for that young person rather than just dealing with the past. And so my presentation today will be mostly a kind of PowerPoint presentation, although I do have a couple of things I'd like to show you without the screen, the PowerPoint screen being on. So if you can bear with me with that slight change as we go through our journey. It's an immense subject to talk of, and I'm trying very hard to keep it in a space where it's helpful for you all. And hopefully there'll be lots of questions which we can think about either in the panel or maybe afterwards. So if I can just go straight to my presentation. And I'm just going to put this up now. Hopefully everyone can see this. I'm just going to make it a little bit better for you all. Really this is a presentation which introduces the notion of life story work, and you'll see in the title it says making sense of fragmented lives, and that title really is what therapeutic life story work or any life story work should be about. It's where we are working with young people, maybe very young people, sometimes older young people, and often carers and people that are care experienced moving into the world, and they haven't been able to understand the rhythm of their life, the concepts of their life. It might well be that much of their journey has been interrupted or have been shaped by those things out of their control. And I want to take you back to 1997 when I was a child protection worker for local authority and was given the opportunity to work in an organisation where my brief was do life story work with children who are often dissociated, who have fragmented senses of who they are and find it hard to attune or to attach to. And so my actual instruction from Mary Walsh, who was just the most amazing individual around trauma work, was just go out, gather up the fragments of children's lives, bring them all back to one space, think through what that tells you, and then help the young person whose story it is and those around that young person to make sense. And that's exactly what we do. We have found our way to help young people, but also to help their carers, whether those are, you know, their legal guardians, whether they're kinship carers, whether they are special guardians or therapeutic foster carers or adopt parents, really anyone that's around them. And we extend that now to schools, and we extend that to other colleagues who may be working with a child around a particular challenge. So making sense of fragmented lives kind of means that we need to make sense of stories. And we've heard a lot today already about that kind of unknown around contact. Sometimes there is the, you know, the worry about what if this happens, what if this is said. I would just say that stories are really who we are. We are, all of us, just a collection of stories. And the way in which we navigate our world is by learning from those stories. And so storytelling is a big part of concepts of togetherness. And we do very simple exercises, which actually you could do if you wish to, maybe following this conference, maybe when you get home tonight, or maybe tomorrow over, you know, dinner, or maybe in an activity with your young person or people. And if you just get your get a piece of paper, and then just draw around your hand, so you've got made a nice handprint. And then just with the young person, you would do this as well. Think of 4 things in your life that you like doing. So 4 things that you enjoy. And then 1 thing, often in our fun, that you love to do. So what we now have is 5 story stems. So if I was doing this, for instance, I like audible books. I love being with my dog. I like being with I enjoy reading, but I love my PlayStation 5. My PlayStation 5 and me are best of friends. It's my go-to when I have lots of stress. I'd like to pretend it's because I need to know what young people enjoy. So by playing PlayStation, I have that kind of insight into their world. But that really wouldn't be true. I just like playing on PlayStation. And so describing to you those 5 things, and let's say you've got your young person with 5 things, and maybe you've got no young person, so that's 15 things, and we take it in turns to tell each other our stories. What we're contributing to the kind of conversation, what we're actually doing is sharing lives and sharing stories. And what we know is that the more that we can share about ourselves and to externalize, the less we carry in ourselves, the less we worry about the world that we occupy. And I do this exercise, we call it all in the hands, with every young person I work with when it just comes to meet them. Often when there's someone who comes officially to see someone, there's lots of worries about what they might do to me. So by just going in and saying, hey, this is me, and if this is you, then who are we? And by sharing that context, we start to connect. And life story work is really around connection. There are lots of different ways, of course, that we do this, but it's also underpinned through some very, very important people in the world of trauma. So here is Bruce Perry, and Perry talks a lot about a relationship being key to recovery. And this is a lovely quote, which I often use for my carers when I work with my carers, that the more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely he will be able to recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. And this notion of love, this notion of sharing your world, of being able to hear others' worlds, means that you have that opportunity to really think about, who am I, who are you, and who are we? And once we get to that point, we can share, we can understand, we can go forward, rather than being stuck in the past, where that past may be defining who we are in the present. So we do lots of different ways of working with children in this therapeutic world of life story work. And on your screen, you'll see a rather interesting tree picture. And one of the things that we do a lot is trying to help our carers to understand the children that they are caring for. And to do that, we would do a very simple exercise, which is called a behavior tree. And all we do literally is we have a tree, so a picture of a tree, so you can just about see that on my screen here maybe. And in the leaves, we ask the carer, not with the child present, just the person caring for the child, so the kinship carer as an example, to just let us know what kind of behaviors and what kind of emotions are on show on a day-to-day basis. And the reason we ask the carer, the child, is because they are actually the expert of the child. And so we need to hear what that view is of this young person's presentation. Now, collating these behaviors, for instance, gives us an opportunity to think about what Beverly James once talked about, which is that all behavior is communication. So can we see through the behavior what our young person is communicating? We then go to the roots, so these roots at the bottom. And the roots really are, what has this young person experienced in their journey? Now, some of these experiences may be abuse-based, some of them may be trauma, some of them may be medical concepts, some might be grief and loss, but it's not about blame or shame, it's about making sense of how these events shape our understanding of who we are. So it's not about saying this is this person or that person's fault. It's about saying, so when these things happen to you, how do those things shape your understanding of you? How does it shape your understanding of parents? How does it shape your understanding of the world? And so these roots are those kind of clue sets, you know, those kind of guides to how our world might be. We ask our carers to draw grass above the roots, because often we forget about these things because we're so busy in trying to manage these behaviors up here. And so when we draw a tree trunk to meet the two together, what we are able to see is that many of these behaviors have been forged by a lot of this, these events. And what we know, of course, is that when we are born into the world, our brain is being kind of shaped and our kind of neurosystems are being formed within the first 3 years of life. So our basic components, if you like, our key network systems are in play more or less by the time we get to 3. There's lots more growth, of course, but those kind of core elements are in play. And what neuroscience tells us is that dependent on the emotion, depending on the events, and depending on the way that person's journeyed from their womb, from the first 3 years of life, will shape how this brain is forming. And so if that's the case, we can see that very young children who may have been involved in issues around abuse, or maybe domestic violence, or maybe they've had issues around drugs or alcohol in their world, that will shape them just as much as any other way they may have been cared for. So we are, all of us on this webinar, what we were. And in understanding what we were, we can then make sense of what we wish to be. So one of the things we say in life story work is that many children are defined by their past, confused about their present, and sometimes not able to move to their future. If we can help not just the child, but those around the child to understand the past, to understand why that means that they have the challenges and the kind of presentation they have in the present, so that they can then decide whether or not those things are still important, that they carry them into the future. We are all what we were, but it doesn't mean that's what we need to be. So we do trees, which is a kind of de-identified 5-year-old's tree. Her behaviors and her emotions, she gets angry, she gets cross, and in the bucket where the tree trunk was placed is all the bits that have happened to her. And in life story work, we wouldn't just throw all those bits into one place. We would methodically go through carefully an understanding of that child's journey. By able to show how we develop our understanding of self, how we develop our understanding of those around us, and how we develop our understanding of the world in general, we're able to think about that internal working model that, if we all agree with attachment theory, we all have, which is, am I worthy? Am I lovable? Am I able? Or have I learned that I'm not able, I'm not worthy, and I'm not lovable? Have I, in my journey in life, understood that the parents around me, the carers who have power over me, are safe, nurturing, and caring? Or has my experience shown me that they are not safe, they are unpredictable, and sometimes dangerous? And what about the wider world, that bigger part of me? Do I have a space? Do I feel that I'm welcomed? Do I feel that it's somewhere that I can get a good feeling of being a part of something, that I'm included? Or has my experience taught me that this world is quite a dangerous space, a dangerous place, and I don't really feel that I belong? And life story work is to try and help children to understand where they see the world, they see their family, where they see themselves, and help to reshape that to a more healthy space if we can. We talk a lot about monsters and ghosts in our work, and this isn't to say that any of us work with monstrous children. We don't. We work with children who have had monstrous things happen to them. And so by understanding what's happened to our young people, we can understand what has then materialized in order to survive those events. And I wanted to share with you a small quote. It's quite a simple one, but it will demonstrate this well, I think. If you are a young person and you have been exposed to stress, you still need to survive that exposure. And so what you have is these coping strategies or these defense mechanisms. And I would imagine, like myself, that all of us in this webinar, this conference, all have the potential to lose our temper, or sometimes do things that we regret almost immediately, whether that's shouting at somebody, swearing at somebody, being very angry or running off or whatever it might be. And all it is that's where we've learned that when we lose our internal control, we have to make ourselves big, or we have to make ourselves strong, or we might have to get away, or we might just have to collapse. And those coping mechanisms that we use are often, used sparingly. They're often things that we have in our arsenal that we don't always call upon because we have other strategies. But if we're a young person that has experienced this stress over and over again, let's say a young person exposed to domestic violence as an example, then they are always calling upon these strategies, and soon those strategies may result into behaviors. And once strategies become behaviors, they become the go-to. They become the, okay, this is what I do because this will keep me safe, without thinking what it might do to those around us because we're too busy making ourselves safe. And it's those behaviors sometimes that we struggle with in families, when we think, well, why are you doing this? You don't need to do this anymore. But they do, because internally, that's their safe, that's their space. So in therapeutic life story work, what we want to try and explore are these ways that children keep themselves safe when those around them may not have been able to, and to help them understand that whether those roots of those behaviors, those roots of those systems are still viable, or whether those roots have gone, whether the danger and the threat is no longer as acute. And if we can help them do that, we then find that their leaves, their behaviors start to fall. They start to be replaced. They start to be no longer useful. And that's really what this work's about. It's about helping children to make sense of their past and how they managed, to make sense of their future and what they do, and to think about, their present and what they do, and then to think about the future and how by working with a kind, caring, thoughtful, informed person, they can start to make sense. In order to do that, of course, what we're also looking at is the way in which our children do this. And a lot of us working with caring for children know that their hurts, their sadnesses, their confusions are often a big part of who they are and often internalized. So it's this thing that they carry around with them. And I do bar charts with children, and I find bar charts are really, really helpful. And these are things that you could do if you wish to. For instance, you've listened now to this conference for quite a while. And if you just think for yourself, how many distractions have taken place? How many times have you found yourself wandering off into another thought? How many of you have kind of lost the thread of the discussion? And these are often because you've got a lot of other things happening in your world at the same time as listening to Sally or myself or Alana. And most of us, when we think about what preoccupies us, it could be about family or health or something we haven't done. And it's not a great big thing. It's often a very small part of our availability. So if I come off the screen just for a sec and show you, I guess, why I do this work, and I'll just hopefully you can see a bigger picture of me right now. Most people, most of you, hopefully, if you imagine this glass is your brain, and then you've got about this much, about 25%, about this much of your brain is already preoccupied with other things. You know, maybe you've got a report to write, you've got the children to collect, you might be thinking about other children in the past, but you know, you've got all the rest of this space, so that when someone like me comes along, or Alana or Sally, and we start to talk to you, we start to fill up your availability by talking about life story work, or talking about contact, or talking about experience of kinship care. But because we are okay and reasonably healthy in our own self, we can contain all this, and then over a period of time we can just process it, and as we process it over a period of time, we get back to our availability and the world is fine, we manage. But if you're a young person like I work with in the main, their experience of their everyday is their brain is full of all these thoughts and worries and memories and confusions and threats, etc., etc. And so they have their world where they're at, say, 80%. But they're often in the same classroom, or in this case, on the same presentation, with the people that can manage it. But here comes Richard or Sally or Alana, and we start to talk about all the things we want you to know. And then eventually you're not going to be able to contain this anymore, and you're going to start to overflow. And what's overflowing now are all the things that are happening right now. So you can't hear me anymore. You can't make sense of me anymore. Now imagine if you're working with a child and this is her situation in the classroom, and she is already, you know, full up with all this hurt and sadness and worries and on guard and vigilant, and she's able to hear part of what the teacher's saying, but over a period of time she is overwhelmed by this. She can no longer hear the carer. And this means that she's now feeling quite vulnerable because all the other children seem to be managing, but I'm not. And then that creates a panic. And then what do we do with that panic? Well, we have to respond to protect ourselves. And so in the classroom, for instance, we might create a scene. We might want to get, you know, kicked out of the class. We might be violent to the teacher or aggressive, or we might shout, or we might misbehave. And what we're doing that for is to be relieved from this overwhelming threat that I'm no longer able. And what if you ask me a question, I can't answer it? Or what if you say, what did I just say? And I can't because I didn't even hear it in the first place. So why am I going on about this? Well, life story work is about helping children over a period of time to externalize all these things, to help to speak out all these hurts, these curiosities, these wonderments. And we do that by using our process to hold the child's story. So I hope that made some sense, but we'll go back into our presentation. And I will hopefully illustrate this a bit more. So if we can help children to externalize all this stuff that they carry in their bodies and in their brains and in their hearts, and we place this on wallpaper, so we use wallpaper, and this is a way in which we can record how the child feels, to talk about their story, to help them tell us about what they think, what they feel, what they understand, what they're confused about, what they're happy and angry and sad about. But that we put all that on wallpaper, what we're actually doing is helping children externalize all this stuff they've held in for so long. And as they're externalizing this, and as we're working through it, their preoccupation in the red lowers. And over a period of time, their occupation for the now increases. And we see this in our work because over a few months, we'll see children start to enjoy school, start to have friendships, start to be invited to birthday parties, start to slow down, start to be less vigilant. And part of that is because we are holding the story, we're witnessing their story, but we're validating who they are. And this wallpaper is so useful because it shows a sequence or a process of this work that allows our children to start to put things together to make sense. And as they're doing this, of course, this externalizing of all these confusions become a new frame of understanding, which they can internalize in a much more healthy way. I work with children for a long time now, but a 12-year-old showed me how to do this. She was doing maths, she was doing bar charts, she came back to do some life story work with me, and she said, Richard, I know I need to do this work with you. And I asked why, and she did a bar chart. She showed me all the things that were in her head about her family, about her mum, about her sisters that she doesn't see anymore, about her brothers who's adopted that she doesn't have contact with anymore, all in her body. And she said, if you help me talk about these things and we put it on that wallpaper that you use, I don't have to carry this around anymore. And if you imagine that being quite a wonderful opportunity for a child to tell their story, but to be relieved of the concepts of that story, we can make sense and we can make recovery a real thing. So what we do here is follow the principle of narrative work. We think around telling stories, sharing stories. And as Bruce Perry said in the book I wrote in 2012, the value and power of this approach to reconstructing and reconnecting a child is done best when that child is part of their own storytelling. So a lot of our life story work in our therapeutic context is done with children 5 years and up. But we also work with younger children by working directly with their carers. So their carers would do the work that they would normally have done with their child, so that when their young person's older, they have the story, they have the way to do the storytelling, and they hold the story safe for the child. We're doing a lot of work across the world, Australia, New Zealand, in Taiwan, Singapore and America, where we're looking at how can we help children to tell their stories and how can we help children to have the opportunity to make sense. And once we have both, we have recovery. Now, our approach is done in 3 key ways. So don't worry too much about all the writing on this slide. This is really because this is around kinship. And often in kinship care, we are looking after children of people that we have grown up with, people that we know, people we're related with. And therefore, a lot of the work that we would normally do in therapeutic life story work around the generational history of the family is already held. So we do a lot of all about me work within our therapeutic life story work. And that all about me is something that you can do from today. It's something that I would absolutely encourage you to do. But for some young people, understanding about their own view of the world now won't necessarily answer the questions of the past. And so for many kinship carers and many special guardianship placements, we do more about me. What that means is that we're not going to be looking at the history of the parental birth, the history of the story of the generations, but what we're interested in is the reason why I live where I live. So if working with a young person who's living with their auntie, and the reason they were living with their auntie was because unfortunately their mother or their father or both had issues around drugs or alcohol, and that meant that they weren't able to meet the needs of their young person. The More About Me would talk about that, and it would make so what does that mean? What's that look like? What's the impact of drugs and alcohol? How does that get in the way of us being able to care safely? Mean about why people do things, and does that mean that they don't love you enough because they can stop, or is it there's other reasons why it was hard for them to stop? So that's the More About Me, very much in that kind of, why do I live with auntie? Why is it I don't live with my family of origin? Why is it I have contact but I don't spend time with them? And in some cases we might have a young person who is lived by, say, auntie, but their sister or brother stay at home with their mum. So why the situation? And this is where we can be really helpful. For other children at the top of our apex, these are children who are really struggling with their world. These are children who are often multi-placed, highly traumatized, finding the world difficult to occupy, finding that they don't really feel that they have a space or a place within their family, within their construct, and where we do a very long-term piece of work, which is really around a year. And that helps young people and their carers to reformat the notion of who, where, when, how, why, and what, but also to help them to make sense of that journey of generation history. So we're often talking about intergeneration trauma. We're often talking about children who have lots of sexual harm, but that sexual harm has visited itself down the kind of generations. We might be talking with young people who have issues around self-harming, issues around sexual behaviors. So all in all, this is the process that we use. And many of the young people that we advise or work with or support areas to provide this work, we concentrate a lot around the All About Me. This is the one that I think everyone should be doing. And I'm going to go into detail now about what these three things are, but therapeutic life story work, that top part, would incorporate the other two. So it is about the need of the young person and what's in their best interest, rather than perhaps saying to a young person, you have to have therapeutic life story work, and it being overwhelming and not particularly helpful, when perhaps a little bit of understanding about why I live where I live would have been much more healthy for that child. So what is All About Me? Well, All About Me is a approach that's been going for many, many years in different guises, but the way that we use All About Me is a purposeful opportunity to gain a snapshot of that child's journey at that moment in time. So as an example, let's say next Friday, you all decide, those of you that are kinship carers or carers, that you're going to do a piece of All About Me book with work with your child. You can get templates off our website. You can create your own. They're 20 pages long. They don't need to be any bigger than that. And they really are about celebrating who that child is in the moment. So it's not about their past. It's not about why they live where they live. It's about who they are in the moment. And we break this All About Me book down into 6 parts. It doesn't have to be all 6. You might just use 2 or 3. So the first part would be, this is me. The second part would be my family. Now, family could be their birth family. It could be their connected family. It could be where they find themselves in their care journey. It's up to them. They would decide. Then it would be my culture, my identity, my heritage. Then it would be my emotions, my feelings. Then it would be around my school, my friends, my, my kind of outer world, if you like. And then finally, it would be about my future. And these 20-page little documents are done every 6 months. So those of you that might be caring for a young person who is 6 months old, if you were to do an All About Me book on their behalf, the music I like listening to, the food that I'm eating, the toys that I have, my things that help me settle, the food I eat, those kind of things. And then 6 months later, you do another one, and 6 months another one, and 6 months another one, and 6 months another one. And let's say, sake of argument, that child gets to 2.5, and there's a decision that child is going to move into a permanency. Well, you have this young person, but this young person now has a passport to her next placement, because that passport will be almost their life journey since they were with you. Now, if you carried on that process all the way through and did one every 6 months, just to update, just to engage, you'll see what Sally was talking about, which is change, the change of worldview, the change of self-view, the change of the view around them, their identity changes, their cultural interests, their games, their schools. So imagine that you've got a young person of 6 that comes into your care, and you did an All About Me book a few weeks into their placement with you, and then you had them until they were 18. So you would then have 2 kind of All About Me's per year, so 24 little All About Me books of a 20-page long in kind of depth. So you'll end up with around about 480 pages which tell the child the story of their journey through your care, i.e. tells their life story. And because it's encouraging the young person to share their lives and share their understanding, if you were to do one yourself about you as they do one about them, then you have this journey which is recorded, this journey which is validated, this journey which tells the story of who. And let's say your 18-year-old goes into their adult world, and then they get to say 20 or 30, and they look back and think, who was I living with and what did I like? Well, you've given them that because they have that in their All About Me. A typical All About Me book would be something like this one. It's been de-identified. Didn't talk about their mum or their dad or anybody else, talked about their carer, and they have a very good relationship with their carer. So he's telling you that she's fun, she is strict, and he remembers scaring her with a tarantula, which was a toy tarantula. He said to me that he's hunky. He doesn't know what that means, by the way, but he thinks he is. But he says that building and creating things. Now, what we do is we use a booklet. The children will complete the booklet with us or on their own or with their carer. And then we'll create the booklet into a PowerPoint presentation. And then we will just print it off as a small little book. And it is something then that they are given. Where do you live? So we would normally have lots of pictures. What feelings do you have? A lot of children struggle with feelings work, so we do a lot of emotional work in our therapeutic work, and this young person here has some challenges around ASD, but you can see that he has quite a lot of emotions, quite a lot of different feelings, and he was quite clearly saying to me, don't forget I get angry, but I also get definitely angry. So here we have this wonderful little boy, and we do lots of different games around feelings work, which if we have a little bit of time before we finish today, I'll kind of have a go with you. Really well, he has lots of music tastes. It's not his real name here, don't worry, that's not a slip of the tongue. I just felt put a name in so you can see where the name would go. Favorite foods, favorite colors, he loves ice creams, especially Magnums. What makes him sad? What makes him happy? What about his school? Break time, lunch times, but he also likes art and maths. And what are his favorite toys? So I've not put the whole one in here. I just want to give you an example. But if you imagine this boy at 12, his interests will change. His friendships will change. And as we build up his story, we're building up his opportunity to externalize his thoughts and therefore not carrying them around within himself. So all that is something I would recommend you all do. I'm really pleased to say that there are quite a few local authorities now who are saying that All About Me's are now going to be used for all children in care. In the Bracknell Forest, down in the London Borough Bracknell Forest, they made a decision that all children who come into their service, whether they're children in need, children that are provided with support through kinship, children who are in care, children who are adopted, will have All About Me's every 6 months. And they've just celebrated 9 months of that program. We have in Oregon, in the west of America, every child in care now does All About Me books. Again, based on exactly what I've just showed you here. And they're about a year into their practice now. And in Australia, we have lots of different agencies, including a big group called McKillop, where every child in their service will also be doing All About Me book, either encouraging them to do it themselves or doing it on their behalf as a custodian of their journey. And if that makes you feel a little bit uneasy, please don't let it, because many children who don't want to do something, then a carer will do it on their behalf, will later say, did you do anything? And if you say, well, actually, the gratitude that they often show is immense. So even if your young person doesn't want to fill this in, just capture their moment, 6 months, capture where they're at, and then maybe over a period of time, you'll never need to do life story work because you've already done it. Today I was asked to talk about therapeutic life story work. So when we talk about therapeutic life story work, well, it's different to life story work. There's lots and lots of challenges for everyone in doing this work, and not least what we've already heard around provision, skilled people, training. I do a lot of training, so do a lot of my colleagues. We have a website which has lots of information, which is called tlswi.com. But we're also going to be hosting the Life Story Forum over the next few months, and that's really for anybody that has an interest in life story work. There's resources available to you. But there's also a lot of work going in Scotland. I've had the privilege of coming to Scotland on many occasions to train, and we have now people that have done a professional diploma that we run in therapeutic life story work who work within Scotland, and I'm sure that they'll be very, very happy to make themselves known to you. And there are a few people on this webinar today. So what is life story work? Well, the way we do life story work is threefold. First is to gather information. Often when we have children in our care, we're not too sure what has happened. We're often not given the information we need to make sense of what's happened, and therefore we almost have to guess. We almost have to assume. So the job of the life story worker is to gather up the information, gather up those fragments. So that's what we do. We look at files, we go through any records, but then we go and interview people such as mums and dads. We might interview teachers and social workers and carers. We are looking at birth certificates, and we're looking at any other documents that might be useful. But we're not there to find out what is true or to find out what is a lie, because quite frankly, there is no such thing. So what we want is the stories. So we want to gather up the stories that mum has, the stories that dad has, the stories the social worker carries. And if we collate those stories, they might be very different to each other, but that's no different to you or me. We all have in our world, he said, she said. So the job of the life story worker is just to gather the information so that when they start to work with the young person, they can then say to the young person, oh, that's okay. Well, mum remembered, dad said, the social worker remarked, it was reported that. So we are the narrators. We don't say what we think. And that's a good thing in therapeutic life story work, because we don't want children or young people to be told this is what you need to feel. We want children to experience and to explore and to try and make sense as best they can into their world. And a good way of doing that, to be honest, is for us as narrators not to say to a child what we think. Often children will say to me, for instance, Richard, do you think that my dad was wrong to have hurt my mum and hit her? Now, as a person, yes, I do. But in a narrating role, it's not going to help that child if I say what I think. So I would say to that young person, you know, my job is to really talk to you about what I think, because I wasn't there. It's really important that you have a think about that. And we talk about what we know about the people that were there. And we do that for many reasons. But the major reason is this. A lot of our children carry shame, carry guilt, carry blame. And if we can be helpful to them, then we need to be as non-judgmental as possible. We need to be as Rogerian, which is, if you like, that unconditional positive regard as possible for all those involved, because no one necessarily sets out to do wrong, but wrong happens. And if we worry about the shame and the blame and the guilt, we'll not go anywhere. But if we can make sense of the impact of those events and what that means to us as people, means to us as our young people, then we can make sense. And children will start to say to you, if you narrate and you don't judge, Richard, I used to do this to my brother. And their expectation isn't for us then to say, well, that was terrible, that was bad. Their expectation is to say, so what do you think we need to think about? What do you think that means for you? How do you think your brother may have felt about that? And so we have these wonderful conversations. The work itself is done fortnightly for 1 hour with the child, but also crucially with their primary carer. So as a kinship carer, you would be involved in this work, and together the idea would be that we would hear the child's story together, we'd make sense of the child's story together, and that although I'm only there for an hour every fortnight, the real work takes place in the conversations and the stories that are shared between you as a carer and the child that might be doing the work. And so that wallpaper that we talked about, this wonderful way of collating stories, a bit like the Bayeux tapestry, where we tapestry out the story of the child, that's added to by the carer. So it's really, really kind of a way in which that child and the carer start to share lives and share stories. This leads us, of course, to using lots of direct work skills, and we use play. Play is an essential part of development, but also those of you that work and care for children, you'll know this. You say to a young person in a very kind of official way, what's happening, tell me what you did, they're not necessarily going to be able to manage that very well. But if we're doing something while we have that conversation, children can tell us all kinds of things. So when you drive your children around in your cars, you can have brilliant conversations with them because you're doing something while you're doing something. If you have a child that's got something really important to tell you, they might wait until you're really busy to tell you. And the reason isn't that they want you to stop, it's often because they know you're busy, so they don't have that undiluted you. So play is a beautiful way of helping children to tell their stories. And we use lots of different play. And again, as a conference presentation, I can't really go into these different things, only, just to say that we use different tools to help our young people. We use Jenga, both as a kind of a way of understanding each other, but also we write questions on the block so that we can bring in questions in a playful way. We use Jenga as a way in which we can manage and contain stories. We use squiggles to help children to develop an understanding, to show us how they're feeling. Sometimes squiggles are really good because you do half a picture and get the child to finish the picture, and as they're finishing it, being curious about what informs them of that picture they concluded. We use a lot of feelings work, and this is something I do want to quickly refer to. Our feelings work, often I'm told when working with children, they're not very good at feelings. They're not able necessarily to talk about how they feel. Well, often that's the vocabulary that they've achieved in the early years of their life. And so you can play beautiful games for children around feelings. And one of my favorite games is, it's going to cost you Maltesers, by the way, but that's a good thing, is just to say to your child and you, and if you're working with somebody else, whoever else it might be, and you say, okay, on this piece of wallpaper, we've got 1 minute to write down as many feeling words as we possibly can. And so we write down as many as we can, and you'll probably get about 11 or 10 feeling words. And if there's 3 of you, you're going to get about 30. So those 30 feeling words, some might be the same, some might be different. We then write them all down individually on bits of paper. We fold the bits of paper up so we can't see what the words are, but we know they're there. And then we play games. And the game that usually does the most amazing thing is a child will take a piece of paper, look at the feeling word, and they have to describe the word without using the word itself. And here we have emotional vocabulary, because as we're guessing the word it could be, we can add those guesses to our list of emotional vocabulary. The next way we play it is by getting another piece of paper, maybe it's my turn, and I've got the word frustrated, and I might then put, a sentence with the word frustrated in. So I'm showing that I understand the literacy of that feeling. And finally, we play the head game, where we take a piece of paper, we don't look at the word, we place it on our heads, and then the people we're with have to show us what that feeling is by acting out that feeling. And that's about emotional expression. So imagine that little game takes about 5 minutes, gives us a whole range of beautiful emotions, emotional words and vocabulary, which then can come into the work you do with children. We use family trees and we use movement snakes. Now, movement snakes are like timelines, and timelines can be the most amazing things for children. Often children say, I don't remember, I don't know, I can't remember. But if you just did a big line and you put 0 on the left hand side and say 10, as the child say 10 years old, on the right hand side, then just go backwards. So what school do you go to? Oh, I go to St. John's. What's that like? Oh, it's okay. What's your favorite subject? I quite like maths. Do you have any good friends? Well, there's my friend Farid. Okay. Do you have any problems at school? Well, sometimes people bully me. Where were you at school before this? Oh, I used to go to another school called Procure. Do you remember how old you were? And you just literally map yourself back, all the way back. And most children will get you all the way to childminding. Once you've done the schools, then go back to 10 years old and say, where do you live? Well, I live with you. Okay, so who lives in this house with us? And what do you think about living in this house? And how long have you lived in this house? Well, I was here, but before I used to live in my mum's house. Where was that? So you can then track back where you've lived all the way back to, most children go to where they were born. And now you have this beautiful movement snake that tells you the story of the young person. All this work is designed really to help our children to externalize what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and what they're doing or what they've done. And so using little things like these bears, for instance, these are great. These are feeling bears. You can just see one here, look. And these are weighted blanket kind of effect. And we've got some sponge fabric at the top. That's the brain spongy. We have a heart, which is silky as the heart. And then we have Velcro fingers where the fingers are. And the idea here is that children can literally put their bear on their shoulder and they can say, I've just heard about what my mummy did then. And I think it's so sad that that happened to my mummy. And so we might say, I wonder how that makes you feel though. What do you think we should do about this feeling? And so what you have is this opportunity for this child to tell out their story, to make sense of their story, and therefore, you know, things began to be clearer for them and less difficult. We use other different aspects like the wall and the wall of development. So this little boy here has put all the things that he should have had when he was a child and then crossed out all the things he didn't have. And then I said, so what does your carer now do? And they worked out that the carer and he now makes sure that those gaps in the wall, those things that didn't happen, can start to happen again. So he can allow himself to be loved. He can feel that food will be there. He can play and there's someone to play with. And this is about if you like, repointing the wall, making it much more strong for children. So we're near the end of my presentation, and I just wanted to just share with you this particular thing. I think this is very useful. Again, I wanted to give you things that you might want to have a little go at without being too complicated. And this is a lovely little model. You just do a circle, put it into quarters, and then you would just say, well, what's true about, now this could be about school, it could be about home, it could be about contact, it could be about where they live, it could be about themselves. So we use the word fact for older children, true for younger children. And once we've done that, then we would say, well, what do people say about you? So the stories, so what do they say about contact? What do they say about school? What do they say about you? And then what would you like to happen in your life? What's your wishes? What's your hopes? So it might be, what would you like to happen at school so school would be more helpful? What would you like to happen with your contact that makes it more useful? And then who can help you? For this is older children, fact, fiction, fantasy, heroism. Younger children, we have true stories, hopes, wishes, and then finally, who can help? And by doing this, just do this on a couple of things where your child's struggling. You can start that child to be able to share with you their lives. And once they start to share it with you, you can share it with them. Here is an example. Mum is a good artist. She's like me. She writes poems. She's good at it. People say that mum's good at art, that she's happy, that she's pretty, but they also tell me that mum has problems which get in the way of her being able to look after me. I'd like my mum to be famous as an artist, the poet. That way mum might want to live with me again. That's her wish. And the people that can help my mum, well, she needs somewhere to live. She has to stay with friends at the moment, but a place to live for mum would be good for her. Mum needs to be helped by her family. So here's a little child who's really struggling about mum. We've done this very simple exercise. And now we can see that part of her thinking is, mum hasn't got any money, mum hasn't got anywhere to live, and that's why I can't live with her. which might not be the case, but here we could see magical thinking. So finally, unfortunately, your book online because this has been recorded, but also the books are very individual. But I just wanted to very briefly say that all that work we've done on wallpaper, we then write this up on a PowerPoint presentation so that we use the children's stories, we use the children's pictures, we use the thinking and the emotions and the feelings, and then we write the book up and we share the book with the child so that she or he can then audit the book. She becomes the chief editor of the book and she decides what goes in the book, not us. So we write it up, they then edit it, and whatever they feel they want their book to look like, it is their book. And their books are their passports to their future. Books are around about 100 pages long, sometimes longer. And those books are really just a representation of all their hard work they've done on this wallpaper work. So really, in a very brief kind of time, I hope I've managed to cover everything. What we're really doing is that we are saying to our young people, who are you? Who are we? How can we make sense of your world and how your world has got you to your present? And what we can do about that to make sense of it so that we can give you the opportunity to move into your future. And by using these techniques, by using wallpaper to allow that child to externalize all their hurts, their sadnesses, their confusions, their happies, their wonderment, and then making it validated and valued, and then creating some understanding of all that work into a booklet which tells them this is me, this is my story, then what we have is that opportunity to help children to move forward safely to the future. I hope that that's given you insight. There's far more information available to you on those website areas that I mentioned already, and I hope that it's been useful for me to explain this process to you. Thank you so much.
Richard, thank you very, very much. Just so much food for thought there, and so many kind of practical ideas that people can be working on, but also challenges about how do you actually make it happen if you're working in an agency and develop this approach and work with children in that way. So great to have that. And we've got quite a bunch of questions, but just a specific one. Somebody was saying about the links to the All About Me book. Is that available on the website as well if people wanted to? Yes, so I mean, if you go on to www.tlswi, which is Tango Lima Sierra Whiskey Indigo.com, and then /training, and then just go straight through all the training areas. That's not really of interest. And right at the bottom is resources, and there's loads of things there for people. And you can always contact me. I'm more than happy to send you things. All right, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And Richard, well, say thanks again at the end, but just thanks for joining us today and for sharing that, because I think that's been enormously helpful for us and for practitioners and kinship carers to hear that and to think about this approach. There'll be some questions, I think, coming in your direction, where we've got a number of questions in the Q&A and that have come in. I wonder if could I ask the other panelists to join us as well? So Sally, I can see you there, and Louisa's with us, and Alana, if you're still about, if you could join us, that would be great. And
Hi.
Hi.
Hi there.
Robin, you're on mute.
Sorry, that by mistake. Thanks very much for joining us, everybody. Louisa, thank you. In particular, you haven't had the opportunity to speak yet today, and I said at the beginning that you'd be joining the panel, so thank you very much for doing that. I don't. Would you just like to say who you are and what your role is, so that people are aware of that?
Hello everyone, so I'm Louisa. I'm the team leader for the family care team in the Scottish Government. We're part of the Improving Lives for People with Care Experience unit, which is in the Children and Families Directorate in Scottish Government. My team has policy responsibility for kinship and adoption.
Brilliant, thanks Louisa. And rather than me say who you are, do you want to just say who you are for that?
Hi everyone, I'm Anne Tom. I'm the Kinship Care Consultant for KCAS and AFA Scotland. So for those of you who don't know me, hello.
Thank you very much. So we've got 15 minutes or so, just over 15 minutes or so. We're going to finish at 1, and so we'll kind of probably rattle through some questions actually rather quickly, but there are a number of questions, and we kind of grouped a few of those together. So Louisa, the first one was probably, it's a kind of more general one really, and it's like in the current parliamentary session, or the one that's coming up, can you say anything about what's being done to prioritise support for kinship carers in Scotland?
I suppose it's really our commitment to keep the promise, and the main vehicle at the moment is through the Kinship Collaborative, so specifically for kinship, but more generally it's in our answer to the promise. I wouldn't like to say there's definitely any legislative change coming up, but that's on the cards. It's an option we're considering as part of the collaborative, and so there will be opportunities to look at that. If there's specifics that people want to go into, I'm not sure how detailed I can be, but there's definitely a real drive and commitment from all partners, not just the Scottish Government, for everybody in the kinship landscape to really make a difference. And I liked it when Sally said she was excited, because I'm quite excited about the change that seems to be imminent and about to happen. So I'm really pleased. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Louisa. And I think, as the Minister said, well, she almost said, watch this space in terms of kind of comments coming up. So I guess we'll keep an eye out on what's being developed and what becomes available. There was a question, and it probably relates, Richard and Sally, to what you were saying about life story work. And the question was, at what age should you be thinking about starting life story work? And this was a question from a carer who'd clearly been advised by somebody that it was too young. Yeah, they were quite keen, but they were advised that it was too young to start with a child that they were caring for. So can you comment on that? And maybe Richard and then Sally.
Yeah, I would say that life story work, depending on what you mean by life story work, really, because there's lots of different ways. But if it's all about me work, I think all about me work should start from the get-go, and just being able to celebrate who that young person is in your family, and then every 6 months just to give the opportunity to record that, so that when that child gets to 5, when I think life story work is absolutely doable for a young person who has the ability at 5 to hold that discourse. The most appropriate time, in my opinion, is between 7 and 9 years old. That's the best time to do this work, because at that point in their life they need their carers, they need you, they're curious about everything, but they can hear all kinds of different things well. But I end up working a lot with much older children. So my age range currently is, my youngest child's 5 I'm working with, oldest young person I'm working with currently is 23.
Thanks, Richard. Sally, have you got anything to?
Yeah, I just absolutely agree with Richard. I think sometimes we think that young children aren't thinking about their experiences, and when they're quite wee, and actually they are. They're, we know that 4-year-olds, for example, 3-4, they're beginning to get a sense of self-blame very often for things that don't go well in their lives. So, and good explanations early doors are really helpful. Really simple, age-appropriate explanations, simple explanations can be really helpful. So I think thinking as soon as possible, as early as possible, about how can we help this child with a foundation of a reason and explanation, from the very beginning, sets the stage for more detailed explanation and different explanations as they grow older.
No, thanks, Sally. There is a question that came in on a very similar theme, which is somebody saying, Richard, you mentioned the feelings games, but could you talk a bit about what we can do for children who don't yet have the words for feelings?
Yeah, so we often will use things like faces, using just pictures of different facial structures. We might use concepts around feelings trees. So what would happen there would be that as the carer, you would explore what emotion you think is being presented, and then you would create a leaf and in that leaf would have that feeling word on, and maybe a facial expression. And so you would just build up a tree of feelings, and then over a period of time, that young person could then start to point to the feeling or starts to recognize the different feelings. And that's a good way of doing feelings work for young people who may have difficulty in recognizing feelings or emoting, or young people who are very, very young that perhaps, you know, their understanding of emotions might be happy, sad, and angry.
Thanks, Richard. Alana, there was a nice question here, which was a kind of links up, I think, to the celebrating kinship care aspect of the event, which was what's the best or what's the most rewarding thing about being a kinship carer? Somebody said.
Definitely the children. It's probably expected that I would say that, but it definitely is just seeing them grow into the little characters that they are, and learning, I suppose, just even I see them as my own children now as it is, but just seeing them reach their potential and knowing that if they were in any other placement with the birth parents, that they're striving. For me, that is the reward, and hopefully it will continue that way. I know we will have our challenges ahead, but just being able to appropriately deal with them, with what these guys have went on about today as well, will definitely help.
Thank you, Alana. That's really helpful. That's really nice to hear that. Just trying to make sense of some sort of logical order, and probably failing completely, but somebody was asking about sibling contact, so and saying we as carers, we're 100% behind the idea of having the contact for the wee one that we care for, but the adults, presumably for one of the other siblings, they're not. Should there be something to make this a requirement, or how do we manage those situations, I guess? Sally, have you got a neat answer to that?
Yeah, well, I don't have a neat answer. I think this is the reality, that actually you can put in place legislation, but you've got folk to deal with who, you know, maybe have some very fixed ideas about what's in their child's best interest. Oh no, we can't have any contact because it will necessarily interrupt, distress this child, take them off their path to recovery. And I think it's really difficult. I think local authorities are having lots of challenges at the moment about getting their heads around this and actually providing forums, opportunities for the adults to be, you know, thinking, reflecting about the child's needs, not just now, but how it actually provides for their best interests as time goes by. So I think I don't have a neat answer, but I think there's a lot more work implied in this legislation, the changes about brothers and sisters, than is apparent, and I think it means that some people will find themselves in really frustrating situations where they are really committed to these lifelong links, but that view isn't shared, and it's really difficult. You can't, I mean, how can you can't force that, but again, you want to think about those mediation processes which might help people begin to think about their child's needs longer term, not just right now, and how can they pave the way and open up and explore that. So there's a lot of work implied in that, and it's not explicit in the legislation, but that's what local authorities are picking up. They're realizing that now.
Yeah. No, thank you, Sally. That's really helpful. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
Yeah, if I could just add to that, really, it's back to what Sally said in her presentation, which I immensely enjoyed, which is that therapeutic nature of contact. So, you know, it wasn't that long ago, some of us are a bit old in the tooth now for social work, which I think I'm one of them. You know, we had the Baker principle of therapeutic contact, which basically said that, you know, the fact that children find themselves going into a system of care, whatever that might look like, they still have family. And if we involve the notion of contact right at the very beginning of how do we, you know, kind of enshrine that right of a child to understand their family. And I would like to say that, you know, in life story work, a lot of the times we do our life story work, we open up those opportunities, because the kind of myth of, you know, well, if they see them, they won't settle, it'll upset them, they'll become more traumatic. Actually, the reality is that that's part of why they're so traumatized. because they've got these holes in their story which aren't actually made sense of. And I think that, you know, if we were doing life story work, one of those areas we should look at is how do we safeguard our children, because we only borrow them for up to 18 years. And then the rest of their life is really down to them. So we need to future-proof, and I think contact is a way of future-proofing.
Thank you very much. There's a few questions around the support that's available to kinship carers, and I don't know whether it would be worth just in a generic way of addressing those, to say in terms of what the Kinship Care Service does. We've covered that a bit already earlier on, but just if there was anything additional you wanted to say about any kinship carers here or practitioners, what support is available to address any of these issues.
Yeah, obviously we've talked a bit about our helpline and our What Now booklet and some of the things we have available, but for practitioners as well, we have a practitioners forum, which some of you joining us today will already be part of and quite ingrained into. So we have that, and that is our way of sharing practice, I suppose, from the bottom up, just about what's going well and how we can share what's going on. And I think the presentations today is really kind of highlighting, you know, the gaps in kinship care, and our service is really trying to help close those gaps. And we do need more resource, and we do need more forums like mine that shares the practice. But we also have our website, kinship.scot, as we've mentioned, which we're going to be developing a practitioner section for that as well, so as we can put resources like Richard's onto the website and it can be easily accessed. So yeah, that's all I really wanted to say, and that you can basically call the helpline if you ever need support, whether you're a practitioner or a carer. Thank
you very much, Anne. Just a couple of things in relation, just coming back to life story work again. How can social workers best support kinship carers with life story work? And possibly a linked question, how can practitioners and carers receive more training on life story work? That thing about, if you are the worker involved, what's the best way of getting engaged with this and supporting the carer?
From my experience, we're just finishing a project in the northeast of England where every child is doing All About Me, or the idea is every child does All About Me. It's being assessed by government through Ipsos Mori and through Quorum. And what's happened there is we built up a really big library of practice, which is available to anybody. So again, the link to that would be Blue Cabin, so Blue Cabin. And creative life story work. So you can go on that site and there's a whole raft of library of podcasts and information for social workers and for carers. I'd go back to what Alana said this morning, which I thought was just amazing, which is this, that the training isn't always helpful because it's in the middle of the week. So there is actually a lot more opportunities now for training, and certainly people like me, we would definitely be training in weekends. I do my therapeutic life story work diploma training in weekends as an example, but I think we need to make it more accessible for our kinship carers. And finally, the last thing, what social workers can do, well, I think if you can dovetail in your practice, you know, when you start to place young people from one family to the next family, the All About Me, because that will gather up the information, and then when someone like me comes along, maybe doing a little bit more enhanced, you know, we can complement that work, but it also means you are sharing your lives with your young people as much as they're sharing their lives with their kinship carer.
Thank you, Richard. We really are running short of time. I just wonder if we could squeeze in one more question, which I think was targeted at you, Alana, which was saying, what one or two things could social workers do that would be most supportive and useful for kinship carers?
I think just asking the question of what support is needed, because believe it or not, that is very rarely asked. That as simple as that, just taking the moment to just have a chat and be real about it, because we have found that there is some that are relatively rigid, which I get, we all have a job to do, I get that, but we do have a human element to ourselves that could actually help somebody open up a little bit more, rather than feel that they're just another task to deal with, basically. And as I said before, we had one fantastic social worker in the very first time round who kind of bridged that gap, took the time to understand us and what we needed. And the second time round, we've had a couple of social workers. I believe one who's on today as well, who's been relatively helpful as well. But you know, it shouldn't just be a select few people. It should be, I think, in my opinion, just the standard practice.
Good, Alana, thank you very much. We really are pretty much out of time. Unless any panel members got anything, burning issues that they wanted to comment on or mention before we wind up. And I think people are contactable beyond today through all sorts of ways, through the websites and the kinship.scot, where you can link to KCAS and the advisory group, or through the Scottish Government to Louisa. So really just to wind up, that's been a really interesting and helpful morning, and a huge thank you to everyone who's presented today, to Alana and Sally and Richard in particular. That's been so helpful. I think it's probably important to particularly acknowledge, Alana, your contribution of being prepared to share your own personal experience in this, and the value that that's brought to the morning. So many thanks for that, and to the folk at KCAS who have done the mechanics, and Simon for making sure that all the kind of technology and all of that worked fine. So I guess finally, going back to the point about what was Kinship Care Week about, and Kinship Care Week was about celebrating and acknowledging what kinship carers do across Scotland. So it's just leaving with that message about just recognising from Alana's story, but Alana's is one of thousands of people across Scotland providing care to children through kinship arrangements, just acknowledging what an amazing contribution they're making to the lives of children, and that's what we're celebrating as part of Kinship Care Week. So many thanks, and thank you for joining. Thank you everyone out there for joining us, for the carers and practitioners who came along today, and do follow up and look at the website for further information, and follow up the other information that's been provided, particularly by Richard and Sally. Thank you very much, and bye for now.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye.